Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Tarmac turns to dirt, and the van bounces across uneven ground, causing my pen to roll off the passenger seat and the hanging cross to swing violently from side to side. There he is, walking straight towards me, about 100 yards ahead, swaying his school bag back and forth and gazing at the sky. My adrenaline is in full flow now. Nerve endings prickling, not a drop of saliva in my mouth. Shit. Am I really going to go through with this? Will he run? No. He's probably seen workers here before. Perhaps they've even shouted warnings that the place isn't supposed to be used by pedestrians. Get a grip. Likely hearing the engine, the boy glances towards the van. Part of me wants him to turn around and race back to the safety of smooth tarmac. But I've spent weeks on this, observing the builders' comings and goings, planning which roads to take, following the kid home, always alone, always the same route, as if it was meant to be. It's just a child, Samuel, my mother's voice rings in my head. I need this, Mum. I pinch the cross between my fingers to stop its movement. The chain it hangs from is cheap and tarnished, but it still means the world to me. He'll look after you when I'm not around, my mum said from her deathbed as she weakly folded my fingers around it. I catch sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror, and it sickens me. The kid's eyes begin searching the sky again, probably wondering what snack to grab when he gets in, which video game to play. Christ, what it must be like to live without anxiety. I roll the car to a halt and slide the mask on, taking another look at the boy, still in a dream world, mouthing something to himself. Perhaps he's singing. That's it, kid. It will all be over soon. I slide the door open and scurry to the back of the van, sneaking another glance. Even though I've checked it over a dozen times, I can't help but do a quick inventory. It's all there, in place. A wave of dizziness washes over me, and I reach an arm toward the van. I wait for it to pass and grab the small brown sack and needle from the toolbox. Come on, Sam. You can't quit now. I try and steady my breathing, but end up making it worse. It feels as though my legs are sinking into the ground. Fuck! Inhale, exhale, inhale. Gravel begins to crunch only a few yards ahead. Shit. He's mumbling something quick, incomprehensible. I run my finger under my collar. It's impossibly hot all of a sudden. 3. What am I doing? 2. I must be out of my mind. 1. I step out in front of him. He stops, expressionless, eyes on the piece of canvas in my right hand. Guilt instantly washes over me, but I remind myself that I need this, that I need his fear. It's a tense standoff, full of doubt and confusion. What happened to fight or flight? Is this shock? Fear? Does he not know what is going to happen? I make my move, and finally, he takes a step back, mouth hanging open. My hands clasp around his left arm, and I almost apologize for my roughness, noting the long scar that runs down his pale flesh. Get with it, Sam! Urgently, I slip the bag over his head and slide my right hand across his mouth, prompting his body to spring into action, kicking up dust and thrashing his arms around wildly. His muffled pleas vibrate through my hand as I drag him back to the rear of the van. I give a quick and hard shove that sends him sprawling across the van floor. Taking the opportunity, I sink the needle into his thigh and step back to study the kid's squirming motion. I thought it would be instantaneous, but it takes a while for his writhing to cease. From the hook to my right, I grab the length of rope and tie it tightly around his wrists. To my left, a strip of black masking tape is already cut, hanging loosely from the side of the van. I grab it and place it across his mouth. Steps that are likely unnecessary, but I'm not taking any risks. The coolness of the breeze rushes across my face as I remove the mask and search his pockets, finding a phone with a cracked screen. It's done. Closing the doors, I take a final look around. Clear. I get back into the van, reach down for the pen, and scribble some notes across the passenger seat pad. I turn the engine over, flick the stereo on low, and pull away. Traffic in the main street is flowing well. The plan couldn't be going any better. I run through the abduction multiple times, trying to pick up something I might have missed. I'm already constructing new sentences in my head, but they still feel as though they lack in some way. I need to dig deeper. Get into his psyche. Lift each layer of fear. Lighter and sweeter air soon begins to seep through the half-open car window, bringing me out of autopilot like a dose of smelling salts. Lush farmland on both sides marks my departure from suburbia to country. The narrower roads and sharper turns demand my concentration as the light begins to fade. I turn the stereo off, letting myself enjoy the peacefulness. I used to love this part of the journey, but it's been tarnished as of late by bouts of anxiety and frustration at the inevitable lack of productivity on arrival. The canopy above begins to thicken, and the road narrows further into the final stretch. There's a quiet innocence here that weighs heavy on me today, but does not extinguish the excitement and the prospect of breaking through. It's the first time I've felt, well, something for so long. The cabin is hidden behind a row of trees ahead. Beck and I fell in love with it after renting the place for a long weekend umpteen summers ago. It was ours within weeks for an exorbitant price. We used to spend many weekends here until the writing took over. When I got the little extra wall put in for the study, she stopped coming. She said she still loves me, but that she's lonely. We have a child on the way now. Just one more book, and I'll quit. I roll up the makeshift gravel driveway and let my head come to rest on the steering wheel. Taking deep breaths of earthy fragrance, I guess I have about 30 minutes before the child starts to come around. Reading through my scribbled notes fills me with a renewed urgency, and I slip the pad and pen into my pocket and head inside. The woody smell of the cabin taunts me. Endless days spent pacing up and down, trying to add life to my second novel. On the table in the corner, empty liquor bottles sit next to the laptop, further reminding me of my failures. I carry the boy through to the study and drape him across the small sofa, removing the sack and tape from across his mouth. There's a glimmer of sympathy, but I can't be clouded. I need to document everything if I'm ever going to make pages come alive again. All of my fear, all of my pain was poured into my first novel, and it left me exhausted, depleted of all emotions, incapable of writing anything else with weight or substance. It was like therapy that worked a little too well, removing the dark cloud that hung around like a tumor, leaving me with a best-selling novel and nothing else to say and nothing else to feel. That was 5 years ago. And the soporific cloud has followed me ever since. Poor kid will have no idea where he is or why he's been taken. Is that worse than knowing your fate? At least you can prepare yourself mentally if your future is already decided. But not knowing? Will he try and escape? Will he call for help? Will he cry? Perhaps in the first instance, he might think it's all just a bad dream? I shut the door and lock it behind me, eager to go on this journey with him. I boot up the laptop and initiate the software for the camera. Everything is set. The experiment is ready. It's 5:20 p.m., and the light outside is fading quickly. His mother will be on her way home from work. I hope I gave him the right amount. I slip my hand in my pocket and bring out the notepad and pen. I need a whiskey. Only one, though. A treat for a successful abduction, if you like. As I relax back into the couch with my heavy glass, I stare at the screen, hoping that all of this will be worth it. It has to be. Over 20 minutes pass before the kid's first natural movement. I wonder if he'll call out for his mum first. He puts a hand to his head and takes his first proper look around. His gaze stops at the camera. Now he knows. His head begins snapping in different directions, eyes widening once again, mouth partially open. He must be 11, 12 at a push. Night terrors may be a thing of the past, but he's still at an age where fear can easily be implanted. Noises in the dark, a scary movie, a sinister mask. Smells will be different, alien, disorienting. Another pang of guilt strikes as I observe his confusion. But this is 5 years of desperation, and I need to push through. He climbs on the bed, peers through a gap in the boards, and screams into the fading light. My pencil almost punctures the paper as I continue to document every little move and whimper. It's been a long time since words have found their way so easily and quickly, and a shudder of excitement works its way down my spine. All this time, I've resigned myself to being the one that wrote that book, but now I feel another is within reach. Living through this kid will give me what I need to inject real fear and wonder into the manuscript that has been sat untouched for too long. His screams are relentless, and only when his voice finally gives up, the tears begin. It took much longer than I thought. He sits down on the bed, puts his head in his hands, and begins to mumble something. Then there's a sudden sharp intake of breath, and his eyes widen again. He thrusts his hand into his back pocket, and now the front, no doubt searching for his phone. Disappointment leads to more frantic sobbing. He begins to gently rock back and forth, the weeping intensifying and heading into full-blown hysteria. His left leg is tapping wildly, and it seems to be getting faster the more worked up he gets. I can make out a string of saliva hanging from his mouth. This is raw fear, raw panic. His body is losing control. Keep with the program, Sam. He'll be home in the morning. Holding the laptop, I tiptoe across to the door and give it a firm rap. His head immediately snaps up, and there's another intake of breath. I observe the puffiness in his face, tears still racing down both cheeks, and eyes as wide as the first time the realization washed over him. He appears to be holding his breath, as if suddenly frightened to make a sound, his face becoming redder by the second. "Kid," I say. He's trying so hard, but the convulsive whimpering gets the better of him again. I give him a few seconds. "Kid." His legs are still tapping, and he's shaking gently. The crescendo of fear seems to be passing. The crying phase is winding up. Is it the human voice? The ignorance and innocence of associating a fellow human with anything but compassion and empathy. How small his circle must be. "Quit sniveling," I snap. I'm trying," he replies, sniffing back the snot that was beginning to well in his nose. "You have 2 minutes to stop, or I'll come in there and give you something to cry about. Do you understand?" Yes, he croaks. I observe the kid as he tries to get himself together. He stands and wipes his face with the back of his wrist and sniffs loudly 3 times. He begins to tap himself on the right thigh, perhaps a mechanism he uses for self-soothing. Rushing back to the couch, I pick up the pen and scrawl down more notes. He's pacing up and down now, looking around the room. Is he searching for a way out? Something he could stash away as a weapon, perhaps? The room is stripped bare aside from the blankets on the side of the sofa. "What are you thinking, kid?" I ask. Silence. I walk back to the door and give a gentle tap this time. "What's going on inside your head?" He sniffs loudly and wipes his hand across his nose. "I'm scared and confused. I don't know where I am, and I don't know who you are." "Is there something you want to ask me, kid?" He stops pacing, gives a violent shiver, and screws his eyes up. "No." "There is. I can tell. Don't lie to me, or I'll have to come in there. He turns towards the door, opens his mouth and closes it again, pinching some skin under his armpit. I make more notes. "Who are you?" the kid finally rasps. "Come on, kid. Ask me the question that is really on your mind. The one that is bouncing around your head like a rubber grenade." Sucking in some air, he takes a step back. Are you going to kill me?" He screws his eyes shut even more tightly as if the act will somehow ensure a more favorable response. Intentionally, I leave a long pause. I note every tremble that he makes, the changing hue of his skin and the variation in his breathing, both frequency and length. Eventually, he opens his eyes, but his face is taut with anxiety and anticipation. This is first-class stuff. "Who was your best friend, kid?" He crinkles his forehead and shakes his head slightly. "What? Your best friend? Who is it? Which one would miss you if you never saw them again?" He wipes back more tears and swallows hard. I don't have any friends." "What about school friends?" "I have school issues. Move around a lot, you know?" I let out a sigh. "You're going to have to make one up then. And I'm going to need you to sound convincing. Got it?" The screen shows him nodding. "You're going to call your mum and tell her you were at a friend's house." "She's not my mum. She's my foster carer." There's a pause as the kid looks down at the ground. "My parents are dead, and the others didn't want me." You've got to be fucking kidding me. Of all the kids, you went and picked a fucking lonely orphan. Kudos, Sam. Stick with it. For Christ's sake, there's too much at stake. What's her name? Jessica. You're going to call Jessica and tell her you're at a friend's house, that you're staying over. There will be no whiny voice, no stuttering or sniffing. If you even look like you will cry, I will inflict more pain than you ever thought possible. Do you understand? I hear him take a deep breath, but there is no reply. The screen shows him opening and closing his mouth as he tries to speak. What's your name, kid? Tommy. I'll ask this one more time, Tommy. Do you understand what I'm requesting you to do? Yes, he finally manages to spit out. What if she says no? Well, that will be a problem, Tommy. I scroll through the handful of contacts in his phone until I find the entry named Jess and tap the call button. As it begins to ring, I slide it under the door. Anything but what I said, and this will not end well, Tommy. He picks up the phone and looks at the screen. Frantically, he begins strumming the left thigh with his free hand as he holds the trembling telephone to his ear. What if... Oh, hi, Jess. Yeah, I'm fine. Good. Okay. Yeah, I'm at a friend's. He pauses to look at the camera. Jake's. Yeah, I was hoping I could stay the night. Yeah, I went home first to get a change of clothes. Yeah. No, his mom said she'd drop me back. Okay. You too. Bye. Good. Now slide it back. The kid did well. A little shaky at times, but it's a pass. I exchange the phone for a bar of chocolate, which he quickly grabs and moves back to the bed. He places it on top of the blanket, beginning to kick his legs alternately back and forth. I can tell that he wants to ask what is going to happen next, but he either hasn't got the nerve or is too afraid of the answer. He continues to kick, but now his legs are crossed together. I write it all down. Perhaps such entanglement is comforting, another trusted calming mechanism. The experiment has already been so rewarding. I probably have enough to make my character tug at even the coldest of hearts. Just a little more. There's only a little light left outside now, so I strike another match and light the kerosene lamp. It fills the cabin with a warm glow. Tommy notices too, and crouches to the floor, placing the side of his head against the warped boards. I tiptoe across to the mantelpiece, grab the mask and slide it on. Edging carefully against the cabin wall, I drop to my knees and rest my head against the floor. Our eyes meet. It's an explosive moment, as though a fog lifts and the seriousness of what I'm doing churns my stomach. Tommy gives a sudden and sharp intake of breath and disappears, feet scampering towards the relative safety of the sofa. I can hear his breathing, loud and irregular, and I have no doubt his heart rate is just the same. Adrenaline is fading, quickly being replaced with the knowledge that this will stay with Tommy, the orphan boy, long after I've dropped him back in town. It's too late to stop, though. One last push. What are you feeling, Tommy? I want to go home. Why? Because I'm scared. You'll never live this down, Sam. What does it feel like, Tommy? What? Your fear. Describe it to me. I feel sick. Is that why you're not eating the chocolate bar? Yes. I can feel myself caving. It's too much. So close, though. What can you smell? What can you taste? Metal. Like metal in my mouth. And smoke. I could smell it and taste it. Salt, too. Jessica said there's salt in tears, but not like the stuff you can put on your chips. Mostly metal, though, he croaks. What else? Tell me everything. Convince me that you fear for your life, and I may let you live. My voice already feels weaker. Blood. Pumping in my ears. And there's a ringing sound. I'm shaking. So cold. And? My mouth is dry. I need the toilet. My legs feel weird. I'm pathetic. All this for ego. What about in your head? Not the physical stuff. Your thoughts. What are your thoughts? I'm worried that you might be one of those strange men that likes little kids. I'm scared you're going to kill me. Normally kidnappers ask for money, but I don't know what you want. What do you want? He spits, the words rolling into each other. I'm not a pervert. What else? Are you going to let me go? He asks. I've been blinded by desperation and a selfish desire for fame. You have to answer my questions, Tommy, I croak. I have answered your questions, mister. Please. Just a heartbroken kid. Tommy. I just want to feel safe. And that's it. The trigger that prompts me to scream and throw my laptop against the wall. All for the sake of ego. What the fuck have I done? How did I let myself think this would be okay? What? What was that? What's going on? Tommy's voice cries. All this preparation. All the weeks of planning. Did I ever really consider the long-term repercussions? Obsession possessed me, all for a few words that people will forget shortly after reading. We're leaving, I say. We drive in silence as the blackness of night swallows the headlights. Not one word has been spoken since I informed him of his early departure. Perhaps he thinks I'm going to stop near these woods. Fidgeting nervously, tapping his hand against his thigh and crossing and uncrossing his legs, he's pretending to look out the window, but I've already caught him on at least 2 occasions analyzing my reflection. Where are we going? He asks softly. Has the mass now lost its menace? I keep my eyes on the road and reach for the kid's mobile phone in my jacket pocket, causing the notepad to fall to the floor. Here's your phone. He grabs it, but I don't let go. Tommy, I'm making you a promise that if you mention a word of this to anyone, I will bring you and Jessica back to the woods and make you dig each other's graves. Do you understand? He nods. You really should be wearing a seatbelt. Fuck, kid. It's broken, I say, releasing the phone. He turns his attention to the cross that hangs in the rearview mirror and follows its gentle swing with his eyes. Thanks, he mutters. For what? Not killing me? The night isn't over yet. We drive in silence for a little longer until we see the bright lights of the city. Everything feels a bit like a dream now, as though none of it happened. But I know the events will haunt us both for a very long time to come. I'm going to pull in for some petrol now, and you're going to get out. Don't look back, just go straight home, okay? Okay. I draw to a halt near the pumps. Go. As Tommy opens the door and steps out, a police car rolls up to the adjacent pump. Instinctively, I turn away, ripping the mask from my face, heart pounding and skin crawling with dread. Tommy turns to look at me for instruction, and I nod for him to carry on. I watch as he makes his way to the pavement, nervously glancing over his shoulder at the police car. A car door opens, and I turn to see the female officer reaching for the pump. Her male counterpart on the passenger side is looking directly at me. Shit! Quickly, I turn away. Did he see me take off the mask? See the kid get out of the car? Is it the plates? I turn my attention back towards Tommy as he approaches the pedestrian crossing. Stay calm, Sam. Just as I turn the engine on, I hear another door open, and from the peripheral vision, I see the officer stepping out of the vehicle. Hey, he calls. A haze shrouds me, and my foot instinctively slams against the pedal, the sound of burning rubber exploding around us. From the canopy's protection, the car skids onto the glistening wet tarmac and immediately begins to fishtail. I'm heading straight for the kid. He turns and freezes, eyes wide. Knuckles are white as I wrestle with the steering wheel, but it's no good. There's no traction on the road. Our eyes meet as I continue to veer towards him, his now glowing bright red. He smiles, lifts a hand, and begins to mouth something, and suddenly I'm spinning off towards the edge of the road in slow motion towards the barrier, the squeal of tires becoming a drawn-out orchestra of smashing glass and twisted metal. I feel something begin to surge inside me. My lungs feel like they're caving in, and I can't feel my legs. Something is wrong with my head, too. Afraid to move it. I'm not even sure I could lift it from the hood. The taste of blood fills my mouth, thick and coppery, metallic, or perhaps the smell of fear, like Tommy described. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Tommy. He walks towards me, still carrying that smile, but he shouldn't be walking. I was heading straight for him. I remember he lifted a hand, and his eyes. You did this, I rasp. Tell me, is the blood pumping? Are your ears ringing? Are you cold? Only the cold. Nothing but the cold. Stop sniveling, he says, eyes glowing red. I don't understand. Didn't you ever wonder why I took the long road home every night? As the sirens approach, I can't take my stare away from those eyes. I could smell you everywhere. Who's been tracking who? What are you talking about? I wish there was some pain, but there's nothing. That's the worst part. All I feel is the ice-cold grip of fear. More voices, close but distant at the same time, and bright lights that begin to blur in a single color. Fuck, I'm scared. No, it's more than that. You couldn't simulate this. You can threaten, pretend, but there'll be a reprieve for me. I'm broken. This is it. He steps forward, reaching through the broken windscreen to grab the cross. He snaps it off the chain and holds it towards the sky, chanting the same incoherent nonsense as before. The cross fizzes in his hand and turns into black ash that carries away on the slight breeze. What are you feeling? What are your thoughts? I try and speak, but only a garbled rasp emerges. Around me, the voices are getting more urgent. In the distance, I can see Beck. She's smiling and stroking her bump. Olivia. That's what we're calling her. Our little girl. They both crumble to black ash and float away on the gust. The notepad on the floor. That's what this has all been about. Who are... It has an energy, doesn't it? Fear. But I'll never get to find out what's going on inside their heads. You finally know now, though. What's it like? It's getting harder to breathe. I think I'll stop trying soon. So goddamn cold. Was I everything you hoped for? Plenty of material? Shame you'll not get to use it. As he steps in closer, blackness begins to fill the outside of my vision. He leans over, bringing his face only an inch from mine. Got a real story for you, mister. He offers a smile. I slit Janet and Trevor's throats and ate ice cream while watching them bleed. I even sliced open my arm to make it look as though someone broke in. And then there was Denise, who had a fall while putting up Christmas decorations. A sudden gust of wind shook the ladder. It took a long time for her to die. Even had time to make a cheese sandwich during that show. I'm fading fast. My heart slowing to a dampened thud. Was I convincing? I think I'm getting better all the time. Practice makes perfect and all that. More car doors slam shut. Police, stand back! Jess is kind of sweet, but I crave it, you see. His eyes burn red as he continues to study my fear. I can smell it, taste it. It will never be enough. He drops his gaze to the floor. You got blood on my new shoes. Voices slow to a drawl. Kid, you okay? He begins to sob, eyes as blue as they come.
That Abominable Sound by Kyle Harrison. I arrived at the Koteric outpost at approximately 1500 hours alongside 2 senior officers from HQ. We had been told nothing about the facility's state or its staff, simply that we had lost all communication with them about 3 days before our arrival. Russell, the head of our group, explained the situation as best as we understood it. There is room for 10 members here at the outpost, but I believe one group left about a month back, and now there are only 4 scientists left. I checked the list, knowing these were the people we were meant to interrogate to the best of our ability. Lucas Wharton, Chief Astrophysicist. Patrick Barnes, Chief Astronomer. Felicia Colt, Secondary Astronomer. Lily Chen, Chief Mathematician. Something had happened here at Koteric, and one of them had the answer. It was up to us to determine what. Russell led the way into the facility, instructing me to find the power box as soon as possible to restore electricity. I couldn't help but notice a strange red vine growing all across the once pristine tiles. How long have they been isolated here? I asked Myra, the other senior officer.
Their mission's objective was to monitor the Halter Vine M30 burst for the past 3 months. But we don't know for sure when that was going to happen, to be honest.
I didn't bother asking about the technical stuff. That wasn't my job. I was just here to find the truth. Going further into the facility, I noticed that some of the vines seemed rich with stains of blood, as though someone had died on this floor, and the plant life had swallowed them up and fed off their life source, the way an orchid would raindrops.
Guys, I think you need to see this.
I heard Myra shout down the corridor. Russell and I were there in a second, staring down at the half-decayed body of one of the scientists. What the fuck? I whispered. It looked like he had been wearing some type of protective suit that was customarily used for astronauts in space, and his entire upper body had been cut off in one single motion, the way a guillotine chops off a head. There was no sign of any further blood anywhere nearby. But then, we heard the sound of feet shuffling in the shadows. It was another crew member, this one wearing a red jumpsuit with Korean letters on the name badge. It was approaching us like a feral animal. As it got closer, I realized that instead of hands, long red tendrils shaped its upper body and distorted its skeletal structure, making the astronauts scuttle towards us like a crab. None of us had a clue how to respond, and for a moment, I was sure that we were about to be attacked as the strange human-like creature shrieked. It was a mixture of pain and anger. Then a shot rang out across the void, filling the creature's shadowy face with lead. It stumbled backward, shrieking again defiantly as we saw a black-haired Asian woman step out of the next room and blast it over and over until at last it crumpled over in agony. "Thank the Lord," Russell began, but then the woman turned the weapon toward us. Her eyes were full of suspicion and fear, like she had just seen the worst nightmare of her entire life. Given what we just saw trying to attack us, I didn't doubt it.
Who the hell are you?
She asked us, keeping her gun raised.
Please. Lily? Calm down. HQ sent us.
Headquarters? That's a lie. They don't give a damn about us.
The woman stuttered, trying to figure out how the hell we were there. Did she think we were figments of her imagination? "We received Commander Willard's message 14 days ago, an SOS alerting us that your outpost required emergency supplies. Then we lost contact with you and your team 3 days ago." Russell paused and showed her the clip of Willard explaining how Team 1 was choosing to leave the facility and asked, "Do you recall sending these messages?" She looked at the commanding officer and then became frantic again, backing away and screaming.
Turn it off! Turn it off now!
Russell did as she requested, and all of us stood there in silence for a moment as we tried to determine what to do next.
Lily, where are the other members of Team 2?
Her eyes twitched as she tried to hold back tears.
Dead. I killed them.
Killed them? What happened here?
It wasn't me! No, it was the noise. It got inside my head. I could feel those tentacles winding straight into my mind. It felt like it was going to explode, burst from the inside out.
She was hardly cohesive or able to form a simple thought. I knew if we didn't act soon, she might decide to attack us, the same way she had her other crew members.
Lily, we want to take you home. But first, we need to determine what happened here at Katurk. Let's get somewhere safe and then we can talk,
But it was clear the woman wasn't going to just comply with what we wanted. Russell gave me the most imperceptible of nods to tackle her the next moment we got. When I saw her hesitate again, I rushed toward her and grabbed at her weapon. We struggled for a moment, both trying to overpower the other. Then the weapon went off by accident, and I heard Myra make a soft gurgling noise. "Holy shit! Do you have a med kit?" I asked as I pushed Lily away.
I don't know. I didn't mean to. No, I did. It was the malevolence inside me, forcing me to. I can't stop it. I can't.
She muttered as she dropped the weapon. Russell took the chance and pinned her to the wall, shouting to me to find a sedative. I scanned the facility and ran to another room for supplies. Climbing over more of the strange tentacled vines, I opened the cabinets and grabbed the syringe, freezing in place as I saw another dead colleague of hers, his entire body collapsing in on itself from the waist down. What the hell had happened here? I ran back to where Russell was doing his best to keep her still and plunged the needle into her neck as she continued to beg for us just to kill her. As much as I didn't trust her sanity, I knew we still needed to get clear answers. I checked on Myra next. She was saying a quiet prayer as she patched herself up.
I'm fine. She got me in the ribs. I think I will be fine,
she told me as I helped her to the next room. Russell instructed us to check the remainder of the facility to be sure that Lily was telling the truth. And take a sample of that monster, too. I'm suspicious of whether or not it might be connected to what happened to the crew. About 15 minutes later, we had set up the rec room to act as our interview booth for Lily, with her chained to one of the tables. She was still agitated and standoffish despite the sedation, so Russell decided to begin the questions with details about their research. Get her to talk about what interests her, he insisted as he began sampling the vines and the blood we had found throughout the outpost.
Do we have to record this?
It helps to keep everything from being jumbled for the record.
Is this audio on a private frequency?
It's not connected to any network.
All right, good. That's good. Fine, we can begin.
According to Commander Willard's notes, your team was researching a newly discovered fast radio burst. For the sake of clarity, can you explain what that is?
A fast radio burst is a transient radio pulse of length ranging from a fraction of a millisecond to a few milliseconds, caused by some high-energy astrophysical process not yet understood. Or at least that's what we thought anyway. The halter burst was not immediately a threat to us after all.
A threat?
We were trying to determine the regularity of the burst, to discover its source and comprehend what it was trying to say. Did you know that one such burst lasted for nearly 16 days, Doctor? 16 fucking days!
So, there is a pattern to these bursts.
Lucas was the first to theorize it was some kind of code, coming from beyond the scope of the Milky Way. He believed it was an attempt by an alien life form trying to communicate with us. And so he made the fatal mistake that corrupted us all.
Commander Willard noted that the source of the burst was likely coming from somewhere 3,000 million light-years away. How could anything like that be a danger to humankind?
We didn't see the pattern, or what it was doing to us at first. We didn't understand that the sound was infecting our minds. It was just research at first. But for Lucas and Patrick, it soon became an obsession to unlock what those alien messages were transmitting.
So you started to record every burst from the halter source. What did you find? Lily began to laugh, nervously. It was the sort of laugh that sounded like a woman had gone mad. She refused to continue questions for the time being, so I checked on the samples from the bodies we had found so far. This is both unsettling and remarkable, Russell explained as he passed me one of the tubes and a microscope to see for myself. This looks just like human blood. That's because it is. There is no mutation here. Just an evolution. Everything about that thing she killed is entirely human, down to the microscopic level. But how is that possible? What has Miss Chen told you? I glanced back toward the rec room, feeling Lily's eyes burning on me. I don't think she's telling us the whole truth. But then again, I don't believe she trusts us.
Big surprise. I don't trust her either.
Myra said, walking into the room and waving what looked like a security tape. What's that?
Recording of the past 24 hours. I was just reviewing part of the footage that wasn't corrupt. It looks like our friend in the red jumpsuit over there killed her crewmates one by one over the past few hours before we arrived.
Jesus Christ! So then all of the crew had been mutated, or whatever, into those things?
Not precisely. Maybe you should check it out yourself rather than me explaining it.
I should get back to questioning her. We can't leave her alone for long. I can review that material. Perhaps discover at what point Officer Chen lost her sanity. When I returned to Chen, there was only one question on my mind. I figured we could kill two birds with one stone. Lily, can you tell me what went wrong during your research?
Everything. But if you mean where it all started, I think it was about a week ago. Patrick and Felicia agreed to stay up all night and try to decipher the burst. They figured a pattern had to be there and we could make a breakthrough. But then the next day, they still hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. They were acting like zombies.
What did they find?
It was that noise. That abominable sound. It was inside them already. The others didn't realize it, but it was corrupting them, changing their brainwaves, transforming them. Like tendrils spreading through their mind. They were becoming its first victims.
The sound of the burst altered their molecules? That's how their body started to mutate? She was becoming angry again, her body flailing as she tried to break loose from the bonds Russell had put her in.
You can't listen to it. It spreads now through all the noise. It's a sentient, living sound that won't stop until it engulfs all of us.
I saw Myra signal for me to come over to her, and I paused the interview to check out the security footage. I saw Lily immediately on camera, using what looked like a simple kitchen knife to protect herself from harm. Then Patrick came on screen, or whatever was left of him. His body was already undergoing strange changes, hardly able to function the way it normally would. His bones and skin distorted, like a burst of noise, walking and crawling down the hall. Lily attacked him immediately as he got close, stabbing him repeatedly until his monstrous body stopped quivering. It's exactly like she said. The crew mutated and she fought for her life.
Keep watching.
Lily pushed off Patrick's body and then crawled into the nearby air vent, perhaps as a hiding place from the other survivors. She watched two of her unidentifiable crewmates in another room, both of which were wearing blue jumpsuits, and listening as they consulted among themselves about a possible suspect. No audio? I asked, but I soon found that I didn't need any. As Chen stayed in the vent, I watched her body begin to shapeshift as well. Long, thin skin tendrils pushed from her hands and came out of the vent, grabbing a hold of the first crewmate and slamming them against the wall. Myra stopped the tape and remarked,
There's more. But I figured that was enough for now. She's lying. She can control the mutation, and she doesn't want us to know.
We attempted to consult with Russell about what to do. However, he was distracted listening to some of the audio recordings the crew had kept on the facility. It's just a bunch of noise, but it is so beautiful, he admitted as we arrived. I couldn't help but notice blood trickling from his ear. Are you okay? His eyes looked dilated for a moment, and he smiled. Oh, I'm fine. Of course, yes. What did you find? We showed him the tape, and he agreed that we needed to confront Lily about it. She may be human on the outside, but I think she is just pretending, Russell decided as we went back to the rec room, only to find our suspect was no longer there. Lock down the facility if you can, Russell told Myra as I rushed to check the current security feed. She couldn't have gone far, I told myself. As I entered the room, I felt a gun against my head and raised my hands defensively.
Close the door.
You don't want to do this, Officer Chen. We just want to help you. You can overcome this infection. She laughed again, but this time, it sounded like she was pitying me.
I have already done that without your help. I'm more than you will ever be.
She shoved me against the control panel, and I got a good look at her face. Already there were more distortions in her features, bursts of noise struggling to destroy what was left of her humanity. She was just a shell of her former self. Lily, you aren't well. The noise, it's controlling you, forcing you to kill and destroy anything in its way. I knew some part of her former self was still in there, struggling to regain control.
I may not look like the self you know, Doctor, but I can't lie to myself anymore. There is no escape from the noise. It's everywhere. Don't you see that? We have opened Pandora's box and released it into the world. It used me to lure you here for a reason, to spread beyond this facility and into the sounds of the world. Now your screams will be contagious. Your skin will be its host. I'm doing you a bloody favor by killing you now.
Lily, fight this. I know you can. I reached behind me and searched for something to protect myself with. And then I touched the fire alarms and instinctively pulled them, hoping to alert my colleagues. I immediately saw her human face melt away and tentacles burst from her skull. They were formed of membranes and bone and teeth, shrieking at 1,000 decibels, hatred of 1,000,000 stars, as they lunged for me. To my left, Russell entered and slammed the door against Lily, urging me to run. I leapt over her transforming body and didn't look back. The alarm got louder with each passing moment as the humanoid creature struggled to maintain form, to hide in Lily's body like a parasite. It wouldn't stop until it had killed her, and us, and was free, just like she had warned. It slammed Russell against the wall and swarmed down the hall like a blob, a mass of skin and tissue that shrieked of pain and evil, yellow and leaking bodily fluids of all kinds as it shed its human form and revealed the devilish abomination beneath. I collided with Myra in the electrical room and pushed her to the other side, the creature not hesitating to follow. Then we both pushed down on the kill switch and watched as the frayed wires caused the room to go up in flames. The strange noise that infected our colleagues from across the universe screamed as it tried to fight, but it had adapted too perfectly to Lily's human body. The fire was its undoing, and soon all that was left was a smoldering, crispy heap of skin, muscle, bone, and decay. We concluded our investigation of the Koteric outpost at 1700 hours that same day, and reported to HQ we requested transport. We all agreed that we would not disclose the findings of the radio burst to anyone else. This was isolation and insanity. Nothing more, Russell told us. As part of our extraction, we did, however, determine to bring with us samples of the strange red plant that had grown during the team's time here. We believe it is somehow also a part of this strange transformation that the entire area went through after the transmission from the distant stars became sentient. At least the first team made it out safe, I told my colleagues as we boarded the helicopter to leave. I have been thinking about that, trying to figure it out. Why would this sound go through all this trouble to broadcast itself to escape this facility? Wasn't Team 1 already possible carriers? The second team must have realized there was a way to trigger the outbreak, to activate the latent infection and mutate their bodies, I surmised as we sat down, and I saw Russell itch at the back of his ear. I could see strange tendrils digging their way into the back of his earlobe. And Lily believed that the sound wanted us to come here, so it could infect us, and hide in plain sight and leave to find a new nest, I nervously said as I watched him closely. What do you think, Commander? Is there an imposter among us? Russell's eyes dilated for a second, and he smiled softly. I'm sure if there were, by now, it would probably be too late for the others. I chuckled, albeit nervously, as we left the facility. And then as we lifted off, I heard this strange ringing in my ears. It was like 1,000 screams in the night sky, vivid and deadly. Somehow I knew it was the same damned noise that had controlled the others. My God, it was inside me. That abominable, impossible sound, transforming me into a wicked little trickster, making me into the perfect liar. Russell shared a knowing look toward me, and I felt a shudder roll down my back. We knew, before this flight was through, only one was going to survive.
Who else could have asked for a more perfect Christmas morning? The sky's not quite dark, yet not quite bright. Snowflakes gently pelting against the windows, the fireplace giving a warm, comforting glow, and the tree itself sparkling with glitter and multicolored lights. In this case, lights of blue and white. James himself loved these types of mornings from Father Winter, especially when it came to Christmas and snow days from school. The toddler sat in the middle of his family living room, surrounded by torn paper and empty packages of presents. His mother, Hazel, sat on the sofa couch, smiling as she adjusted the radio's volume so the classic songs of the season could be heard well. Teddy, James's father, smoked his pipe, also grinning at his son's enjoyment of the various gifts he received from their relatives.
You've opened everything, honey?
Hazel asked. James took a sec to look around at the new toys, books, games, and money to spend on whatever he pleased, nodding enthusiastically. Everything? His father chuckled.
Yeah, everything, Daddy.
Teddy placed his hands on his knees, rising from his usual spot. Oh, I don't think so, buddy. Hold on a minute. With a wink, he headed out the door that led to their garage. James looked confused, staring at his mother for answers. Hazel only shrugged, a playful smile on her face. His father then returned, somewhat struggling to carry a large box wrapped in red paper and tied with curled green ribbon. The young boy's eyes widened in surprise. He had done this for his previous collection of presents, but something about this one Teddy brought in just now. It felt so appealing to him, and he had yet to even open it. Go on. Open up. It's all yours, son. James needed no convincing. His fingers quickly fiddled with the ribbon, loosening it off the box. And the instant he did so, a small noise cried out. Not just any type of noise. A yip, or yap, or... He pulled off the wrapping and removed the lid of the present, eyes wider to the point they might fall out of his head. Inside sat a puppy, staring up at who would be her new master and tail wagging. Her fur was pearly white. Spots of black decorated her body all over, and her eyes seemed the most interesting to James. While most Dalmatians had eyes of either pure brown or solid black, this one has eyes of blue. Pure, icy blue. Maybe it was because one of her parents could have been a different breed of dog. Husky, perhaps? They were well known for their bright blue eyes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Daddy.
James carefully lifted the puppy out. The latter wasted no time, giving him various kisses all over his face. You like her, kiddo?
I love her.
Hazel and Teddy both shared a chuckle, enjoying the sight of boy and dog.
Remember, you have to look after her and take care of her. She is your responsibility.
I know, Mama.
So you got a name for her, son? Teddy got the camera ready. James put on his thinking face, still holding the puppy in his lap by her underarms. He wasn't sure if he wanted to go with a cliché name like Max or Trixie. No offense to those who had named their dogs those names, but he noticed something along the animal's back. Her spots seemed to form some type of wings, almost angelic.
Angel. You're going to be Angel.
Angel barked in reply, once again attacking James's face with kisses as he laughed in response. These two were going to have a beautiful relationship for a long, long time. As James grew into his preteen years, he learned very much how to care for Angel with Hazel's help. How to feed her, clean up after her, give her baths, and take her on walks around the block. The easiest was playing with her. No trouble with that lesson. Yes, this seemed like a happy family until Teddy lost his job, turning to vodka as his only comfort. This slowly turned a once loving father into a brute of a man. James nowadays found himself hiding in his bedroom, tears running down his face, listening to the verbal violence between his parents and hugging Angel close to his body. The pup in question would try to comfort her master, gentle licks on his cheek. It was already scary enough to hear the shouting and screaming below downstairs, but what was most terrifying was Teddy stomping his way upwards, Hazel's protests falling on deaf ears, and he would barge into James's room, ready to take out more frustration on his son, who cried while Angel could only yap in anger at the older man. By the time he had reached 16, James was hardly happy like he used to be, and it wasn't even a happy choice to be pulled out of school away from his friends and doing online courses instead. Didn't feel the same. He was stuck in a reluctant routine, from spending time cooped up in his bedroom on hours and taking Angel out of the house as long as possible. The arguing of his folks he grew used to. However, it still concerned him that Hazel could not stand much of a chance against Teddy in his violent, drunken state of mind. The comfort he got was from Angel and a few of his friends from an online chat. One of them was Sarah, a girl he knew back in his kindergarten days. She mostly talked of how she missed him and also bring up events he'd missed at school, either funny or serious. James had also been informed she was planning to move out of her home someday, but she promised that he was welcome to come with her along with both their dogs. He wasn't sure about the idea, having to leave his mother while his father being like this, but he would at least consider the offer. He was broken out of thought by the Dalmatian, leash in her mouth and pawing at the door. A glance at the clock told him it was after 4, and he stretched. Time flies fast, sort of. James threw on his jean jacket with nothing else on his agenda, took the end of the leash from Angel, and headed outside. The weather was between summer and autumn, a little crispy, but not too cold. James stuck a hand in his pocket, somewhat lost in idle thoughts as Angel led the way, sniffing the sidewalk and grass. Either he just did it out of habit, or Angel seemed to know what he needed most, but he ended up at the cherry brick house out at the corner of the street. Said house belonged to his friend, who sat outside and glanced up to see him approach. Sarah smiled. Her eyes of blue sparkled from the sunlight, her golden curls bouncing in the breeze. She was clad in a red skirt and white top with a matching red coat. Popcorn, her cream-furred Pomeranian, yipped in excitement and bounded forward to his larger playmate. James dropped the leash to allow Angel some interaction.
James, you made it.
Sarah trotted over to embrace her childhood best friend.
Thought you'd prefer being mostly glued to your screen.
I didn't have anything else going on, James merely shrugged. How's school right now?
Ugh. Some people refuse to flush in the bathrooms. We've had to have an assembly about it. At least twice.
Sarah laughed weakly before her face faltered to one of seriousness.
Your parents still fighting?
Pretty much. Surprised there haven't been any noise complaints with how they argue. The two turned their attention for a sec on the two animals, Popcorn darting in random zigzag lines while Angel bounced to the point that she seemed to resemble a large black and white grasshopper. They smiled.
It's so funny. Popcorn's usually timid around dogs larger than himself.
James scratched at a spot behind his neck. Seems Angel is an exception. The two began to share various conversations while their dogs played together as time faded. James barely noticed how late it was getting until he received a text from Hazel, who had been wondering where her little chocolate chip was. He only informed her that he was hanging with a friend of his and that he was doing all right. Sarah noticed it getting late too and offered James to stay for supper. Her parents were out for the evening, and she had several TV dinners. He thought about it for a moment, and then agreed. Sarah felt a little bad about giving James a cliched dinner that would offend most others, but he didn't mind. It was best to have a fried chicken meal. That came with corn, mashed potatoes, and a brownie to finish off, then having to sneak down and take a few items to nibble on while his parents were distracted by their fight. The friends sat on the couch together, while Angel and Popcorn sat by their respective masters' feet, watching on Netflix Green Eggs and Ham that everyone had been raving about recently. Fascinating to take a simple children's book and turn it into something rather emotional and enjoyable. It was rather dark out when James finally had to head home with Angel. Sarah offered him her flashlight to borrow to find his way. They both waved a small farewell and separated. As the boy and Dalmatian approached the house, they began slowing down. Would Hazel and Teddy still be awake? Would James get in trouble yet again for staying out this late? Sure, he had informed his mother, but not his father, so who knew? James switched off the flashlight. Okay, let's just say you got distracted by a cat, and it took a while to stop chasing you down. Angel gave an offended snort. I know, it's not like you, but I'm running out of excuses. He reached slowly for the door, pressing the code to unlock it, and stepped cautiously inside with Angel by his side. Carefully now, he just had to make his way towards the staircase and head for his room. The lights came on, startling them both. Well, shit.
James, is that you, honey?
Hazel made her way down to greet her son.
You've been gone more than usual.
Mama, I told you I was with a friend. You remember Sarah? She offered me to stay for... The hell have you been? Teddy followed. More likely, stumbled down the stairs. He'd been drinking yet again, as James could tell from that sadly familiar smell. Dad, I was with a friend, and she... A little blonde brat, was it? You know how we ought to feel about them selfish rich folk? They can afford more than us and tend to rub it in our faces.
Teddy, please don't.
Hazel was immediately muted out of the conversation. Why do we even bother spending money on anything if we get nothing in return? Just goes to waste with what we place it on, such as that mongrel. He jabbed in Angel's direction. She was way too much. I don't know why I bothered spending my last cents on such a useless animal. James felt a spark of anger. It was one thing to insult his mother, but belittling the one creature that stayed by his side so long. If you think you can just... I'm not thinking, boy. I know. Best we get rid of her. To save us some real cash. Got it? A deep growl rumbled forward from the animal, growing louder as Teddy forcefully approached, pushing James and Hazel aside. The second he was within reach of her collar, Angel bit down with full force, refusing to let go. James quickly escorted Hazel out of the room for safety. He couldn't remember a time he'd seen Angel this pissed, and this didn't look pleasant. Teddy's screams and Angel's roaring barks filled the house, both James and Hazel holding on to each other underneath the kitchen table. The noises went on for seemingly about a half hour till they slowly died down, but mother and son remained on edge, emerging from their hiding spot. James slowly peeked in first to the living room and paled at the sight before him. Blood was almost everywhere. The floor, walls, and furniture were speckled dark red. Teddy lay in the corner of the room, grasping at his mouth, which bled heavily from the inside. Angel turned to her master, her muzzle also tinted pinkish red, as well as her front paws. He squinted at the pink item in her teeth. There was no way that couldn't be a... The Dalmatian in question only gave her tail a happy wag as she swallowed it whole.
James, we just can't.
But why? She just protected us, and this is how you thank her? Just plan to give her away? James stomped back and forth, unable to believe what Hazel had the nerve to suggest.
I don't know how she would turn into such a dangerous animal, but...
Dad was the dangerous one. Can't you see that he's straight up fucked in the head now?
James, enough.
No, not enough. I'm not sending away Angel after all she's done for me, unlike you have. James clenched his fists in anger. You think I like being pulled out of school? Away from my friends? Away from the only other safe place I had from you two?
Please, it's hard enough with your father's condition as it is.
He used to be my father. Hazel was slowly moving away from worrying concern to annoyance at her son's persistence.
All I'm saying is...
Do you enjoy being his punching bag? When did my mother all of a sudden become a masochist for that asshole?
Stop it, James, please.
That's the real reason you refuse to leave him, isn't it? You care more about your own bitchy needs than you do your son. James mostly expected Hazel to break down into admitting he was right. He just didn't expect her hand to make contact with his face, knocking him backward. It left him briefly in shock and shaken, eyes moving to gaze at his mother. She had the look of shock in her eyes at what she had done, but he could care less. He couldn't anymore, not with how she felt. The better idea was giving away his only comfort. Hazel's voice fell on deaf ears as James rushed up the stairs, slightly stumbling as he slammed the door to his room. He managed to catch his breath, which slowly turned into soft sobs as he held his legs close to his body, hiding his face in his knees. Angel, who had been kept cooped upstairs during the whole argument, moved her way towards her master, gently nuzzling his cheek. He eventually hugged the dog close to him and then brought out his phone to dial a certain number. The choice had been made there and then. It took a few more years to plan out the best time and what to bring along, but sure enough, James was ready to move out with Angel by his side. During this time, he had hardly interacted with his mother. He didn't care to visit Teddy, who remained in the hospital most of the time. He still gave her his phone number so she could call him up, but if and only if she promised to get herself help and away from Teddy's abuse. Hazel was hesitant, but promised that she would. James loaded Angel into the back with popcorn, took his seat beside Sarah in the car, and off they went to their destination with a nod. The house they arrived at was located on one of those small streets where few families lived. It had a big enough yard for the dogs to romp around in, and even had a forest and creek a few yards off. It looked nice enough to take a hike in or even camp out at. Not surprisingly, it didn't take very long for various people on the street to welcome this young pair to their part of the neighborhood. They brought gifts, such as bathroom lotions, baked goods, and those fruits cut in the shapes of flowers. Angel and Popcorn even befriended a couple of the pets that came along to welcome them. There was Grumpy, the Pendersons' bulldog, Marmaduke and Scooby, the Hensons' twin Great Danes, and even Goliath, Miss Pennyaple's tiny chihuahua. Even a couple of alley cats roamed the area, one of them Everyone nicknamed Scarface, due to his missing eye from what could have been a previous catfight. Scarface was reluctant, but eventually he was won over. James and Sarah had a pleasant time living together once they'd settled everything, and the house was set up the way they liked. They enjoyed events such as barbecues with the neighbors, spending a summer's day at the beach, and many other activities. Over time, the young pair grew closer with each other as their friendship developed into something even more. First came their love once James dared to propose, which Sarah happily accepted. Then came their small wedding. Lastly came Scarlett in the baby carriage. Her skin color was a mix of her parents', but she fully inherited Sarah's blonde curls. The child was an instant favorite in the small family. James and Sarah did almost everything they could to please their daughter with whatever she wanted most. Angel and Popcorn took full nanny positions, such as howling a lullaby whenever Scarlett had trouble sleeping. I assume by now you're either hoping they're fully a happy family or expecting something to take a turn for the worst. Well, you'd be somewhat correct. Because there came that one stormy night in late October. They were all gathered in the kitchen, celebrating Scarlett's birthday. The 7-year-old smiled brightly at her cake, decorated with the face of Princess Ariel. She had quite a fascination with mermaids. James sat beside her with a smile, and Sarah took a couple of peanut butter biscuits out of the oven that were suitable both for human and dog alike. Angel and Popcorn couldn't help their habit of sitting next to the table, staring intently as they waited for something to snack on.
You know, Mommy, Daddy, this is my very best birthday.
And plenty more to come soon enough, sweetie, James agreed.
Can my friends come next time?
Due to a virus going around, Scarlett couldn't have all her friends over like she wanted to. It was mostly to be on the safe side, even if they did wear masks. Sarah set down the tray of cookies, smiling as she offered the Dalmatian and Pomeranian each a biscuit to scarf down. The family went on like they usually did, with a cake slice each. Scarlett enjoyed each gift from her parents, along with some that her friends had managed to deliver beforehand. James didn't notice at first, due to giving his daughter undivided attention, but he slowly took in the interest of Angel. She'd grown quiet, stiff, and kept staring at the front door down the hallway. What had caught her attention anyways, he wondered. It was pouring out. Not a night anyone would want to be outside for. A low growl sounded. That was Angel's growl, one James recalled a long time ago. Soon all their attention was gathered as Popcorn jolted to his feet, perked up his ears, and began barking like mad.
Do you think Scarface invited himself over?
Sarah asked, trying to lighten the sudden situation. That attempt sadly never worked for very long. The front door's knob began to jiggle weakly, then rattled madly. Knocks like gunshots struck from the other side. James quickly pulled his wife and daughter close as the dog stood guard, growling and barking at whoever was trying to intrude.
Mommy? Daddy? Who was that?
Scarlett was beyond terrified. I can't say for sure. Quick, Sarah, get Scarlett upstairs and don't come down till I tell you. She didn't want to leave him, but gathered Scarlett in her arms, headed for the master bedroom, Popcorn hot on her heels, while Angel stuck by her master's side as she'd always done. James dug through the closet for the gun they kept just in case and cocked it, ready to give off fire if he had to. Steady, old girl. Steady. Get ready. The door eventually was forced open from the other side, a figure staggering its way inside in pain. She looked older, yet James recognized her. Mama? Jesus, Mama, you gave us such a scare. Hazel only groaned in protest, reaching her arms towards her son. Tears leaked down her bruised face. What's wrong, Mama? James only got a sigh as an answer as she collapsed to the floor, a knife stuck in her spine, soaked in blood. Another figure stumbled through the doorway, who James also realized as... But that couldn't be. But there was Teddy, clear as day. He could only give off grunts and groans due to his missing tongue. James, growing horrified, began backing away, still holding the gun at this point. Angel growled loudly in warning, ready to attack Teddy if she had to. The disarranged man was moving closer and closer, then received a fiery pain in his hand. James fired a warning shot as they locked eyes with each other. "Dad, don't do this. You've got a granddaughter upstairs. You don't want to be doing this." Teddy seemingly pondered, remaining quiet before rushing out the door. James felt the urge to follow him, with Angel right behind him. He sadly had to pass his deceased mother. Rain darted downward onto the men, thunder and lightning making their cameos here and there. James tackled his father, and the two of them fighting with fists, the gun having been dropped. Angel barked from the sideline, encouraging her master to fight on. Finally, the younger man had the other pinned down, preparing the final blow, and he somehow couldn't do it. Teddy was giving off a sense of sadness in his eyes, as if regretting everything he had ever said and done to his family. Hazel was already gone. Would he do the same to James? A car horn sounded, then a screech of tires. James hardly had time to react as time slowed down and Teddy shoved him. Next came a blur of black and white. His head was swimming painfully, pounding hard against his skull. James sat up as best as he could, gripping his head. He felt dizzy, almost sick and lightheaded. He eventually opened his eyes to the rain falling, but extremely slowly. He took one hand to catch a few drops, watching as his limb gave off trails as it moved. The rain seemed to fade through his grasp, as if he couldn't quite touch it. He looked to his left, seeing his former father's body sprawled out on the pavement. Despite all that he did, he wished him to finally find peace and happiness. But that blur of... He turned to his right to meet a dreadful sight. Angel, his beloved Dalmatian, the comfort he had growing up, was also displayed, deadly still. He moved his best towards her, choking on sobs as he attempted to hold her close one more time. "No, no, no, Angel! Angel! Come on, old girl! Please, please! You can't leave me like this! Come back to me!" He buried his face in her fur, letting out all his emotion. She didn't deserve this. She in no way deserved dying like this. If only there was some way.
James.
That voice was one he never heard once in his life, but somehow he felt he always knew it for so long. He spun around at the sight of her. She glowed brightly, giving off a warm smile, and giant feathered wings fluttered from her back. "Angel." The younger man crawled his way towards his beloved pet, embracing her as she embraced back with her head. James laughed sadly as the Dalmatian gave him gentle licks, just as she did many times before.
It won't be too long now. Hopefully he's learned from all his mistakes this time.
James looked puzzled. Angel acted as if this wasn't the first time Teddy had, but how was that possible?
Tell me, James, do you recall those interactions with all the animals you came across as a child?
He nodded in answer.
And those insects you didn't have to treat kindly, but did regardless?
James nodded again.
Well, there's a high chance some of them could have been me in a previous life or two.
You? He couldn't believe what he heard. Some of those creatures were you? Angel smiled.
It wasn't just me looking for a new life to move on to. Most others have as well. If we chose life to be one's pet, as I have been, we'd focus closely on a human to be our potential companion. But sometimes, it can turn out to be a mistake.
James could understand that pretty well. Was Dad?
He was mostly human in his past lives. None of them turned out for the greater good, unfortunately.
Angel frowned.
This one, however, he had started so well, but felt like he was faltering. Hence why he must have brought me to you.
It seemed to make some sort of sense now. Teddy knew he'd fall down a bad path again. He had gotten Angel for James, not just as a gift, but to keep him protected from his parents. And Hazel, well, Maybe Teddy did away with her so he could finally be at peace. He gazed down at his hands, still leaving trails as they moved. Does this mean... am I?
Only one way to find out.
Angel gathered up the leash around her neck and her mouth. It glowed a white light.
Hold on tight.
James slowly took grasp of the lead, and it felt cold at the touch. The mist began to gather around them, evolving into a stairway for them to climb. Angel headed up first, tugging James after her. He was a little surprised to find the cloudy pathway was solid, like in that Mary Poppins film. He kept his eye on Angel, trying not to look down and doing his best to take the spots she somehow knew where to step. She'd look back a few times to make sure he was doing all right to keep up. He'd nod to reassure her, she'd nod in return, and they'd continue on their way. James eventually had to take a look downward, seeing how high they were, houses and cars the same size as those miniature landscapes people sometimes collected. People looking more like ants and lights like that of fireflies. The cloud they were heading towards had a yellow glow from behind, indicating what its location was. Angel stepped onto it first. James came up behind her, only to slip through the cloud, having the leash to hold on to. Angel looked over the edge at him in concern. James tried to climb his way back up, but felt a hard shock to his chest, causing him to slip more. This kept repeating himself. Angel! Help! Help me, old girl! The Dalmatian pondered a moment, using her teeth to yank him up the closest she could get to face him. James sighed in relief, ready to pull himself up, but facing Angel now, he saw a sadness, yet happiness, within her icy blue gaze.
Remember that I've always loved you.
He didn't have time to react as she snapped the leash out of his grasp, causing him to fall slowly. He stared after her, tears in his eyes. Angel only smiled over the edge as clouds crossed her path, blocking her from view for the last time. James struggled to grasp at nothingness. Seeing how the pavement below was rising faster to meet him, he braced himself, ready for a bone-crushing landing. Instead, he felt himself sinking into the ground softly, like he was tucked in for the night. James jumped awake, finding himself in the hospital surrounded by blinding white walls. The sounds of doctors and nurses, the beep from his monitor, and the murmurs of the doctor with his wife and daughter filled his ears. His soft groans caught their attention, Scarlett crying out apologies, and Sarah assuring him he was safe and okay. James smiled weakly, brushing the locks of his little girl's hair, and gazed at his beloved, silently asking, Angel? Dad? I'm so sorry. He sighed, laying back on his pillow, feeling sleepy from the medication pumping into his veins. The voices and noises faded slowly away as he drifted into a heavy sleep. Wherever she was now, whatever form she decided to take, or had taken by now, all that mattered to James was that she was happy being someone else's angel, just like she'd been his.
Titties! The dam finally broke. Titties! Echoed the mouths of nearly 100 broken-toothed and missing-toothed, bewhiskered shipyard workers. It always started with one man. Then everyone in the shantytown tavern would raise their mug or hat or soup can, or whatever they were drinking out of, and echo the sentiment, and that's when the Titties song began. Titties, titties, titties! Titties, titties, titties! It was a song where the lyrics didn't progress much further than the title. No melody. 3 beats on, 1 beat off per measure. All it meant was that someone in the group had reached the edge of his limit first, and now he was obligated to spot several others with his own allotment of rum or whiskey. They would stomp their feet and rap their fists until they were too tired, or something else distracted them. You might have guessed that there was a shortage of women in this environment. You'd be right. No woman in their right mind, or with any shred of awareness for her safety, would have lived in our little shanty town, affectionately referred to as Perdition Ridge. It was barely safe enough for children, like me. Our little ramshackle huts of cinder blocks, corrugated tin, and wooden pallets lined the shore like the barnacles on the ships. More often than not, we were walled in by a skybox of fog that made our little place feel infinite and isolated, cordoned off in its own little netherworld. Things were fairly predictable after the titties song burst out. With someone else doling out the precious supply of liquor, others got careless about hitting their own limits. Then, whoever didn't pass out would go home to their own nests of rubbish. My old man never quite blacked out. He always managed to drag himself home to me, where I pretended to be asleep. All too often he would step on me, and I would do my best not to cry out. He'd slur the titties song a couple of times in defiance of the others, and, I'm sure, out of a measure of longing to go back home. I mean, home. I didn't remember much about our real home. I remembered that it was warm, lights were brighter. It wasn't damp and miserable, and I wasn't always getting sick. I kind of remembered Mother. When she talked to me, her voice was soft and soothing. Not so much when she talked to Father. I barely remember the beach that she would walk along. She would take me with her. Her and Father yelled at each other a lot, so we ended up on the beach more often. It had this pale sand that was almost white and soft enough to sleep on. That's all I've got. I didn't remember hearing her say that she loved me and that we would see each other again someday, but I tried to convince myself that she had, and I just forgot. The only thing that I had left of her was a small drawstring bag full of that pale sand. I kept it inside of a small lockbox I found on the shore, which, in turn, I kept under a couple of loose floorboards. It was the only way to keep them safe from Father. It was the only way to keep anything safe from Father. Once in a while, I could get Father to talk to me. It wasn't often, so I would bullet him with as many questions as he could handle before he got annoyed. Where was Mommy? When could we go see her? Why did everyone but him wear just one glove? How did we get here? The only question he would ever answer with any clarity was, how did we get here? Everyone in town had been invited by the fisherman. That's how he had introduced himself. He never gave a proper name. He just showed up one day shortly after Mommy had given birth to me. A strange character that wore a wide-brimmed hat studded with hooks and a long, flowing raincoat that was more like a robe than anything else. He carried a long walking stick carved from rotten driftwood that curled up, and above his head where a small glass lantern hung. He showed up asking for Father by name, asked him how things were going for him and his nice young family. Father explained that things weren't going very well at all, which seemed to be what the fisherman had been expecting to hear. So he proceeded to explain that he oversaw a great maritime operation on the shore of the sea, where men could make a good living in a short amount of time. The catch was that it would require Father to relocate. He would have to live on site and be willing to work long hours. But business was good, so pay was high, and it would only be a few months before Father would be able to move back home and live off of his earnings. If he turned out to be a good worker, they could make a regular arrangement of him working for a few months and then spending the rest of the year at home with his family full-time. My father was little more than a backbone and a set of thumbs. He eschewed work, and he loved to drink. The prospect of high returns for relatively low effort drew him in. Mother wasn't for it. She said that the fisherman was like his long-lost twin brother or something, full of fine promises that each ended in a noose. It turned into one of the worst fights they had ever had. And then, there we were, in Perdition Ridge. Father never explained why I wasn't left with Mother, and he got mad if I tried to pry. She just wouldn't have been able to take care of you, was the best he could do. It didn't really matter how young you were. If you lived in Perdition Ridge, you had a job. My job was to set the cages, to try to trap crabs, crayfish, or any other unlucky animal for our dinner. The jetties were bristled with traps like ours. Some weighted, some buoyed. Cages with meals that carried a price that the intended prey could not comprehend. It was the only reason I was ever allowed out on the jetties in the first place. I wasn't to be out on them unless I was setting our cages or drawing them up. I enjoyed it enough because it gave me something to do that Father wouldn't punish me for. But most of all, I wanted to catch a glimpse of Father at work. I wanted to be there when one of the ships passed close by, and there he would be, and I would wave at him and feel proud, and he would do the same. That never happened, but I kept hoping that it would. Setting the cages was fairly easy. You load a mesh bag with salted herring or haddock, place it inside the cage, drop it down, and just wait. It was another ordinary day when I was setting the bait that I really started to pay attention to what I was doing. The cage was nothing to the bait. If it had still been alive, they could swim free, no problem. The mesh bag was their cage. Whichever lobster or crab would come along would be ripping the bag open to feed on the bait. No obstacle to them. But they would be caught by the cage, heedless of the bigger picture. It's a cage only if it can trap you, I mused. You could be inside one, but still free to go if it wasn't made for you. I thought about the many things I'd caught in those traps. I'd pull them up, and they looked like they hadn't understood they were in a cage until it was too late. Then I thought of my father, and the look he'd get in his eyes right before he'd set to drinking. A grown man that could go anywhere or do whatever he wanted, but he looked like his body was his own prison, like his skin was a cage for his soul. The sharp sound of a bell broke my thoughts. One of the ships had snuck up on me. It was passing by in a wide arc. I wasn't used to that. It looked like it was going to come close enough for me to touch it. I hoped that would be my chance to see my father at work, and my heart rose. But it hovered in confusion. The ship emerging out of the pale wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It was monstrous, bigger than anything. It seemed to float on the air more than it floated on the water. There were so many boards missing from the hull that the gray of the fog shone through, showing up the many iron cages that hung on the vessel's sides. There were oversized flames all over her. There weren't any visible containers for them, no glass, no brass, as if they were burning open and unchecked. I couldn't see my father or anyone on the deck, but I did see lots of moving shapes in those cages. I thought maybe she had been hunting large game of the sea, and the cages were perhaps holding small whales and dolphins or other things. In a moment of brutal clarity, when the ship was as close as it was going to get, I saw that there were no animals in those cages of gridded flat iron bars, but they held men that were frenzied to the point of resembling animals in a survival-driven panic. They howled out to me. They barked at each other. some even attacking each other out of desperation. She drifted back into the opacity of the fog before I could piece together any of what I had seen. My very last sight of the ship was the stern, where two unusually tall figures came as if to see me off. One was wearing a wide-brimmed hat. The other bore something like a great curved blade that could have passed as a gigantic fishhook. They were blurred in silhouette, but somehow I knew they were both looking at me. The baying of the prisoners faded, but not without one final sound that chilled me further. The bleating of a goat. It was like the croaking of a raven, like the animal had been ill. My ears tuned in obsessively to catch the sound again, but there was nothing. The whispers of the sea were all that was left. I had heard that there had been other children in Perdition Ridge before, but at the time, I was the only one. I had something like a friend among those salty, smelly old men. His name was Murphy, and he was usually done with his work an hour or two earlier than everyone else somehow. Murphy stood out. He fed the superstitions of the others and profited off of them. He had transformed a good portion of his small living area into a forge, all the parts cobbled together from ship junk and whatever washed ashore. His specialty was glass. If you brought him sand, and it had to be sand from someplace important, like where you fell in love or the site of a fellow worker's demise, he could melt it and shape it into a talisman or a charm. All of his clientele were simple drunkards, so they didn't question how or why anything he made had any power. All too often he was called upon to craft glass eyes for men who would lose an organ of sight to either injury or infection. He himself had a glass eye, and it was an effective advertisement for his services, but I often wondered if he had actually been the one that made it. Each eye he made was as close as possible to the remaining eye of the customer. The one he wore had a bizarre shape to the pupil, one that I hadn't seen since my briefest sight of a goat on Grandpa's farm. That hourglass shape that I heard an octopus's eyes had as well. Besides the shape, the color was far off too. It was like something stolen from a sea demon. He was willing to have me around and talk to me for a short while before Father would be in. I got to talk to him in most of the ways I wished that I could talk to Father, but of course I still loved Father more. Soon enough, I went from talking to learning. Murphy gradually let me learn how to create glass from sand and shape all kinds of trinkets. He even showed me how to make an eye. I once asked him if I could make a glass eye like the one he had, and that was the one single time that Murphy got mad at me. It lasted for all of 3 seconds, but it was sharp and harsh, and it caught me by surprise. But then it was over. We never spoke of it again, and it never happened again. My apprenticeship took place all without Father's knowing, of course. He would have been furious. So, in secret, I learned how to make another kind of cage, one that people wanted to be in. I would go to bed with my mind on the bag of sand that Mother gave me. Should I make it into my own talisman? Would it ruin her gift? If I were going to melt down my mother's present, it would only be when I was sure what it would be. I was about to bring myself to ask Murphy for advice on what I should craft from my secret sand. What would do justice to the love of a mother and still not draw my father's disdain? Something like that. I didn't get the chance. Perdition Ridge took my one friend from me without a chance to say goodbye. I have no idea how it started. Everyone was at the drinking hole, which meant that I could step outside and enjoy the night and listen to the strange sounds coming from the world of drinking men. Somebody slipped into inebriation first and started the Titties song. The rhythm was carried from horizon to horizon by the seawater. At some point, there was a sharp turn. The sounds of merriment soured, tinged by anger, fear, and something else. Almost what you'd expect to hear if a fire had broken out. Someone ran outside and rang a heavy, rusted bell hanging from the roof of the tavern. Another bell answered from across the water. I thought it was an echo at first. All at once, they brought old Murphy outside. Their voices were strange. You could have mistaken it for laughter, but there was no mirth. It was urgency, grief, and dismay in such high registers that it sounded eerily, fiendishly, like laughter. But it was no such thing. One and all, to the extent that their various states of inebriation allowed, they pushed, pulled, and dragged Murphy, whose voice was an amorphous howl of protest. But the peal of that strange bell only grew. The burning ship winked into sight from the murk of the night. Yes, the same ship I had seen while setting the cages. It came as close as it could to the shore without running aground. The mob surrounded the jetty and pushed Murphy out onto it. He nearly tumbled into the water. A shadow in the mist emerged with the light of a single ember that seemed to project itself for miles. It was a tall, towering figure riding in a smaller boat. Seabirds of some unnatural species clung to the smaller vessel and circled above it. The whole of the thing was moving too rapidly for a vessel that was neither driven by sail or pushed by oars. As it drew close, it became clear that it was being pulled by something else. There were men caught up inside a fishing net nailed to the hull of the ship. They swam as best as they could in the cramped quarters of the cords. Flailing, struggling to stay above water, their movements both keeping their heads above the surface and driving the ship forward. You could see the life leaving Murphy's body when he saw the foul boat coming near. The tall shadow stepped from the ship to the jetty. It might have seemed less tall if it weren't for all the skeletal birds that perched all over it. There was just enough visibility, just enough clarity of the air and sharpness of my perception to descry that the shadow was not just another grim reaper figure. It was something far worse. The birds weren't sticking around because they were official envoys. The thing wore a living, writhing coat of something that twitched and wrenched and squirmed like a giant squid caught in a web of hooks. Dark spots on the weird garment became mouths and nostrils, and, yes, eyes. The birds jabbed and plucked at any such eyes that dared to open. My overcharged brain thought I could hear the gaping mouths trying to scream, with whispers that mingled with the ill wind of the sea. Then there was the hook. It was big enough to be a curved sword. It may have been the thing's hand, I couldn't tell, but it hung in the air like a cobra gathering itself for a strike. The thing glided towards Murphy, who was at that point squealing like a pig. He bounced off a few of the mob that were just brave enough to push him back towards the attacker before shrinking back. Despite being rusty and barnacled, and there being no sunlight, the monstrous implement flashed in its swing. It lodged somewhere between Murphy's neck and his shoulder. Murphy was pulled backwards into the embrace of the monster. The great hook became alive with subtle, even graceful and surgical movements. The birds formed a towering cyclone above the shadow, as their voices fought for space with the sounds of ripping and tearing. Murphy's screams became ragged, then became gurgles. A pile of something loose sloughed onto the jetty, which the birds zeroed in on. The struggling shape that had been Murphy was somehow a size smaller, and its movements were more frenzied. Its screams were an unnatural octave higher. The towering shadow casually opened the net that held the other flailing bodies and tossed Murphy inside. As soon as he made contact with the salty water, Murphy's former shape made gyrations and squeals that shouldn't have been possible. The towering monster then shooed the birds away from the grisly pile and slung it over its shoulder, got aboard the boat, and left. The phantom boat disappeared from view, but it was a long time before the mob dared to turn their backs on the fog. Father stumbled in and made his way to bed, chanting, "Titties, titties, titties," like usual. Except this time, it was like he was trying to forget something. I wanted to ask about Murphy, but somehow I knew that I shouldn't. Some days later, I awoke to the sound of something that didn't belong on the shore. I'd been dreaming about being on Grandpa's farm again, and I wondered if I were somehow still dreaming. I cast a cautious glance at the unconscious shape of my father, who was still snoring away, before I dared to go outside. There was a goat. I had heard its soft baas drifting through our window. It was a different sort of animal. The coat was rugged, coarse, and the color of dusty coal. Its eyes were bright amber. Most startling of all were its horns. They were like calcified tentacles that twisted and snaked. It lifted its head to look at me as it chewed, but I couldn't have imagined what it had found to eat along our barren little strip of hell. Even as far as the palate of goats go, there wasn't much to choose from. It bobbed its nose at me, which I took as a sign of friendliness. It had been so long since I had been in the company of a farm animal that I couldn't resist. I reached out to pet it, and it let me. My careful rubs became scratches on its cheek. When I rubbed its chin, it spit up something into my hand. I would have recoiled in disgust if I hadn't understood right away what I was seeing. It was a glass eye. More precisely, it was Murphy's glass eye. I looked at the goat in shock. Its response? It opened another eye. A third eye, directly in its forehead. Instead of being amber like its other two, this one was red as blood in the sunlight. Then there was a pink slit in its throat, as if cut with invisible fishing line. The opening oozed something watery and pink as it moved to articulate whispered words. "Guard it well, as you would guard your soul." I scarcely had enough time to comprehend these instructions before there was a sharp cry behind me. Someone had seen the goat and raised the alarm. I cupped the glass eye close to me as there was a flash of movement all around me. The goat turned and ran into the water. It was fast, but not fast enough. Rusty spears and makeshift lances converged on the animal with deadly precision. My instincts fired off before I could think them through. I ran home while the focus of everyone else was on the goat. Father was still sawing logs, so I lifted the floorboards of my secret chest as best as I could with shaking hands and put the eye away. The cries of the goat broke my focus. The entire host of men were all gibbering the same words like coked-up seagulls. "The goat! The goat! The goat! The fisherman's goat!" The goat itself was torn apart by the brute force of hands and rusty pocket knives. Part of me figured that this was the work of men who had been on a steady diet of fish for far too long. After all, the carcass of the goat was roasted and devoured around a bonfire of driftwood, stone, and metal that evening. But there was something else still, something beyond basic hunger and desperation, something that drove the men to mount the three-eyed head of the goat on a wooden stake, something that made them dance around the head in concentric circles that were a little too well choreographed for drunk laborers. I was hunkered down in our shelter, trying to watch the whole thing from a distance, but Father burst through the door, sending it sailing across the room. He grabbed me with brute force and a deranged giggle and dragged me outside to the cyclone of intoxicated brutes. The light of orange flames glistened on the flab of salty, sweaty bodies as they gyrated around the goat's head that wasn't much more than a shadow against the evening sky. "Dance!" Father yelled at me. "Dance, you son of a bitch!" So I danced. I was both terrified of my father and elated by the fact he actually wanted to involve me in something. The spinning air reeked of sweat and alcohol, yet in some strange way, I enjoyed it. I had unconsciously drifted closer and closer to the inner ring dancing around the head of the goat. Its three eyes stared out in independent directions, and yet I couldn't shake the fact that each of them were somehow trained on me. The mirth of the mob was broken by a single, persistent cry. A group of the sailors were sifting through the final remains of the animal, carefully filleting each layer of tissue and bone, searching for something. They weren't finding what they were looking for. "There's nothing! Nothing! Come on, there's gotta be something. We've been over this 20 times. It's not here." "What about the head, then?" "It's never in the head, you know that." "But it's gotta be if it's not here. It's the rules." "God damn it, if you muck up the head, you've screwed us all. The head is sacred." The tension spread like wildfire. I was compelled to look up at the head, just in time to see the oozing slit reappear in its throat and whisper, all too loudly, "Keep it a secret." That was just before a dozen clawed, drunken hands seized the stake the head was raised upon and began tearing it apart. Each horn was broken off in a separate hand. The three eyes were gouged out. The jaw was removed. The brain was excoriated. "You fools! You fools! It's not there either! You've broken the rules!" Somebody shrieked. "But it wasn't in the body! It had to be in the head!" "It's never in the head! It's never in the head! You've damned us all, you worthless moron!" "Shut up!" And just like that, the revelry had devolved into rivalry, and violence tindered. Fists swung in deadly arcs mere inches over my head. Hands seized me in a powerful, painful grasp and whisked me away. When I could see straight, I was back in our shanty. My father's eyes smoldered behind a face smeared with sand, dirt, sweat, and blood. His yellow teeth shone like stars. "Where is it?" he snarled repeatedly, not even giving me a chance to feign ignorance. He started banging my head against the floor with each repetition. Each blow hurt a little less, and a ringing in my ears swept me away. When I came to, I couldn't tell if it was early morning or late evening. It was just gray. Father was nowhere in sight. My head was pounding. The sound of seabirds drifted into my ears. Something about it wasn't quite right. We didn't get regular visits from seabirds unless there was something rotting on the shore. I got myself decent and stepped outside. First thing I saw was Father, standing at the far end of one of the jetties. Gulls were nipping at his fingers as he raised them skyward. I thought for a moment that the birds had softly glowing eyes. As my senses ramped up, I detected that the birds actually had no eyes at all. The ghostly pale sky was shining through the openings in their heads. Only remnants of a papery, flaking skin clung to their bodies. The same light also shone through their ribs, like the roof of Grandpa's barn. As they bobbed and weaved at my father's hands, his fingertips turned dark. One of the ghoulish things dove again, and one of the dark fingertips was suddenly a fiendish white. The roaring waves washed the sound of my father's voice back to me. It should have been crying. It should have been pain. It was laughter, a rolling, wailing laughter, like a toddler playing with a puppy. Each bird that dove came up in an arc and guzzled down something that fell through their bodies into the water. One by one, they dove faster, turned more sharply, their feeding becoming so fevered that they reached a point that their papery skin was flaking off and drifting away on the sea wind. Father laughed harder, or cried harder. I watched until he was reaching up to them with a hand of gleaming bone, the birds frustrated in their efforts to find any more flesh. I pretended to be asleep when he came back inside. I was terrified that he would hear my heartbeat thrumming through the loose floorboards. I couldn't resist trying to catch a glimpse of his hand. He kept it hidden. When we got up for the day, he wore one glove. From that day forward, I never saw him take it off. I waited until I was certain that he was gone for the day. Murphy's shelter was untouched. I fired up his forge. I took both the sand gifted me by my mother and the strange glass eye. I melted them both down and crafted the glass into a star. I never saw the stars in Perdition Ridge, just like I never saw my mother, and like I would never see Murphy again. So I made something to remember them both. I strung my new talisman up with fishing line and wore it beneath my clothes. I was setting the cages along the jetty when a hand shot out of the water and grabbed my wrist. I jumped back in alarm. Two hands grasped at the jetty and a body pulled itself out of the water. It was a woman. Despite the decay and the disfigurement, I could tell that it was my mother. I recognized her clothes. Cloudy though they were, those were her eyes. I was torn between joy and terror. I wanted to hug her, despite the ungodly odor emanating from her. I started crying. "Mama, what happened to you?" "Your father." "What? What's that supposed to mean?" She wouldn't answer. She just stood there, her empty ribcage expanding and contracting with simulated breaths. "Where is he?" she hissed. "He's working. He'll be home tonight." "Where is home?" I led her to our shanty. She stared at it for a long moment before she began walking into the water. "Mama, where are you going?" "Say nothing," was all she said. I watched as the top of her head moved so far out and then stopped. There, she waited. It was my mother, and I was glad to see her. but something about the whole thing felt off. There was no point in staring at her all day, so I went back to work. She sat in the back of my head all day. She was clearly dead. Something inside of me kept me from exploding with grief. It was somehow caged up inside of me, away from my heart, so I could keep going through the motions of working. And that's what I did. It was another ordinary day. Father stayed out late, drinking. He came home slurring the Titties song. He didn't ask about Mother, and I didn't tell him, though I really wanted to. Was she going to live with us now? Was she just here to say goodbye? I thought about her until I fell asleep. The silence that greeted me when I awoke was anything but normal. I was usually awake before Father, and his alcohol-induced snoring wasn't subtle, but quiet reigned, and it was deafening. "Father?" I said. There he was, lying on his back, his mouth wide open as usual, but no snoring. I watched the covers. They didn't rise and they didn't fall. I leaned in for a closer look. His mouth was filled with something. Sand. Pale sand. My hand flew to my talisman. It was gone. The fishing line was still there, but the glass that I had lovingly crafted was gone. "May I come in?" boomed a bone-rattling voice. Ducking into our shanty was the fisherman. He was way too tall for our shelter. Any words that I had died in my throat. Shadows seemed to hug him, and they wrapped around his face under his wide-brimmed hat. "I apologize for all the trouble, young man, but you have something that belongs to me." He walked over to the bed, shoved his fingers into Father's mouth, and dug something out of the pile of sand. It was the fiendish glass eye I had melted down. "Something interesting always happens when this gets away from me. I'll leave you to your work." "My work? I'm not one of your workers," I said. The fisherman frowned. "I don't have a contract with you, do I? Oh, mercy, no. No, you were here with this gentleman. I see. Well, pack your things and be ready to leave at sunset." "Where am I going?" "Just be ready." A cargo ship that seemed barely able to stay afloat took me away from Perdition Ridge. The fishermen had somehow arranged for my grandparents to meet me at port. They were beside themselves with joy to see me. The happiness didn't last too long before I found out what had happened after Father had gone to work for the fishermen. Mother was nowhere to be found. Nobody could find her. It was like she had vanished from the face of the earth. There was no way to get in touch with Father, and not for lack of Grandpa's trying. I told them as much as I could remember about life in the shipyard, but I didn't know how to tell them about Mother. Had her talisman worked because of the glass eye, or because the sand came from where she had been left by Father? I wonder how many people are stuck with stories caged up inside of them that they have no way of setting free.
This is a dream. The room swirled, misshapen around me. The vague contour of belongings I knew to be mine My bed and dresser, the clothes piled in the hamper alongside them, all sat in a foreign arrangement, askew and twisted against walls seated in wrong directions. Everything was silent, dark, like the night itself had stopped to hold its breath. This isn't my room. I inhaled. Paper crunched beneath my ear. It came back to me. Scattered on the desk beneath my head was supposed to be my midterm. Just like this was supposed to be my room. My new one. Like the end of a drawn-out sigh, the night breezed back to life. The quiet whir of electronics wound quickly in the background, filling the vacuum with their gentle cicada hum. The flash of my clock slithered between the glass bottles that shared the desk with me. The aftermath of my getting through the first months of college. My room. A place in a city I didn't know. Surrounded by people I didn't know. Even the roommates I'd never had the courage to truly speak with, just left as strangers who lived on the other side of my door. It was a place I'd wake up sometimes still and realize after a moment I wasn't home. I left my head down, letting it swim as the light flashed in and out. Midnight, it told me. 12 in big green numbers. The room would appear in the brief moments of lucidity, distorted through the bottles, then blink out. Rhythmic, rising and falling. Awake, not awake. Real, not real. Maybe I actually was dreaming. Until the hiss of static flooded from my television, churned by a light that drowned out the dark. Uneven, flickering like 1,000 struggling candles. I pulled my head from the desk, half flailing to protect my eyes. I fumbled around, searching for the remote as the gray haze blared from the glass. Thick noise poured like gravel through the speakers. I felt the small rectangle underhand, quickly pointing it at the screen. Nothing happened. I clicked it again and again. Tossing the useless thing aside, I scooted up close, groping at the side of the box. Snow and thunder filled my senses, the rush of light turning sickeningly in my sleep-deprived and beer-sloshed brain. I felt the power button depress under my finger, cutting the signal out. Everything plunged into darkness, except the screen. It didn't quite die, just clicked with electricity under the gray surface. Lines of flickering static crept slowly in as the blurred outline of an image appeared in the glass. Cutting through, fading into a sickly green, until it drenched the room. Lingering white cuts hissed as the image slowly pieced its way together, stuttering like a tattered VHS, forming into the outline of a room at night with dark, vague shapes of furniture, with a television set against the wall, flickering erratically between dead channels. My eyes slowly grew accustomed to the brightness, the room emerging further into solidity through a haze of scanned lines. Grain crackled. I licked my tongue against my dry lips. I studied it. Everything. The pile of clothes, the posters on the wall, the desk with stacks of bottles arranged in an unruly mass. Felt familiar. A chill crept through me as I looked at the desk. The bottles, the TV, everything placed on the screen just as they were next to me. Everything the same, down to the dark mass that slumped in the very chair I sat in. The silhouette of a man slunk low, his head turned toward the television, motionless and obscured by the screen that burst and crackled with light. I turned instinctively in my chair, half expectant to find someone standing on the other side of my room. Only my bed and the wall stared back, as empty as they had always been. I turned back to the man on the screen, his features hidden in a drape of shadow. I thought he might be dead the way he sat, near catatonic, and with his head fixated on the screen, sitting and staring. Only the gentle rise and fall of his shoulders betrayed a sign of life. What the hell was this? Hidden camera flashed across my mind. I'd read about that on a forum. Stories about two-way mirrors in sleazy hotels and pervy landlords with holes drilled in bathroom walls, recording illicit videos used for blackmail or sold on the internet. The idea of a camera placed in my room before I moved in had crossed my mind, along with 1,000 other horrible scenarios. I found the place in an online ad. Roommate wanted, cheap, college adjacent. I couldn't afford student housing, so cheap was good. And unfortunately, cheap can also mean sketchy. But this was it. My big, brave first steps into the real world. First time on my own in a new city. All my worrying about secret cameras, of kidnapping and serial killers, it was just paranoia, I'd convinced myself. I was quickly having second thoughts. That wasn't all that was twisted into a pit in my stomach. It lingered in the room like an unseen presence, that I was watching all of this unfold in front of me as it was happening, that this was real. There was a man there, in my room, sitting in the very chair I felt against my back, like I could reach through the screen and touch him. I flipped the VHS deck open on the bottom of the TV. Empty. I could scratch recording off the list. Movement on the screen caught my attention. Not from the man, but the door. It crept open at some point just behind him. There was no sound, only the hum of my television. The door opened wide into a pitched murkiness that I knew to be the hall. There in the dark, something stirred. The indistinct outline of shoulders and a torso, given away only when the TV would flash just bright enough to land over them. Someone waited, faceless in the heavy grain, a slight sway to their figure, standing like a drunk. The man at the desk moved for the first time, a twitch, then settled deeper into the chair, unaware of the observer in the hall. They seemed to sense that and stepped into the room. The light cut jagged shadows over his features. I jumped in my chair, standing up to look back at the door in my actual room, only feet behind me. Still closed. Of course it was. A shiver tickled through my spine as I gazed over it a long moment. Like I couldn't trust leaving it alone. As if I could feel someone just on the other side, waiting in the darkness. I pushed that feeling down and left the door, back to the screen. I recognized him, my roommate, standing in the shadows of my room. Ed and Sam, the strangers I lived with. I didn't even know their full names. I'd met Ed first, spoken to him on the phone before I'd made the agreement. He was at least my age and went to the college too. We're a bit of a party house, he said. Good, I thought. Burst my way out of the bubble, I told myself. Not sit in my room while they blasted music all night, yelled drunkenly and fucked the place up, littered the house with detritus, old food and bodily fluids. Then there was Sam. He lived on the couch for all I knew, a burnout with a hairline thinning into an unkempt scraggle and a sparse goatee. A man who stood well over a foot taller than me. I don't think I'd even seen him sober, not that I'd ever really spent time with him. Just a passing what's up in the hallway on a good day. Said he went to the college too, although I'd never seen him there. The first week told us a lot. That we weren't friends. That we simply existed in the same building out of convenience because it was the only place any of us could afford. That I'd made a huge mistake. How much can you really get to know a stranger in a few months? What they're capable of? Now Sam stood in the grainy video, in my room, unmoving the entire time I'd watched, just swaying with that drunken stagger, until his head lifted, came up to stare, blank and expressionless. The round dark circles over his eyes watched forward through the distortion of degraded tape, looking right at the screen. Unease probed along my skin as I watched him back, like he was standing right in front of me. He smiled, a grin all too wide, toothy and pointed, stretched like rigor mortis on a cadaver. He turned, stopping as his eyes came to rest on the man at the desk. With a glance back, as if to make sure I was watching, he took a step, coming to stand within arm's reach. The man didn't stir. It took a second for it to come into focus. Something dangled from his hand, a long strap with a metallic glint at the end. The glimmer came into view as he raised it. A belt. I knew it instantly. Sam's pride and joy. A gaudy, oversized buckle emblazoned with a steer skull. What the hell was he doing? I leaned close to the TV, half standing in my chair as Sam lifted the belt, holding it taut between his hands. My pulse climbed into my throat as the man twitched in his seat. He wasn't going to. The man shifted, just a small twitch. "Wake up, damn it," I thought at him. "Wake up." A shake of his head. He was coming to, agonizingly slow. Sam hovered the belt just behind him. I was almost out of my seat, leaned so close to the TV static crackled against my nose. "Get up, for fuck's sake, get up!" I wanted to yell at him, or slap the screen till he heard. "Get up, goddammit, get up! Turn around! Behind you! Look behind you! Look at it!" Like a starter pistol, the thought had turned into words, slipping out in a half-scream, half-groan at the set. "Look at him!" Nothing as gentle as a stir this time. The man jolted his head straight up, swiveling, turning the wrong direction, toward me, away from the belt that just as quickly cinched over his throat, wrenching him back. A shudder coursed through his body, arms jerking out in surprise, pulling at the sudden garrote. Sam held the thrashing man tight, noose securely locked, pinning him against the back of his chair. There was nothing on Sam's face, no look of struggle, no sign of the exertion clearly visible in the knot and muscle in his arms, nor the belt wrapped so tight over his hand they turned red. He held the man there, legs kicking, thrashing against the desk, sending the television set onto the ground where it spilled out a distorting light over the two figures. The man writhed, the desperate struggle in his limbs slowing as lethargy crept in. The belt dug deep against the soft tissue. He was dying. Dying. I couldn't watch. I jumped from my chair, sending it to the ground as I mashed at the power button. It wouldn't turn off, even as I jammed my finger against it, the black circle digging against my skin. It wouldn't turn off. I should have turned away then. That's all I had to do. Just move my head. Just close my eyes. Just don't look. But I didn't. A deep, morbid pull glued my eyes to the screen, forced me to watch. As the man's body twitched, the last of his life silently choking out in front of me. Bottles spilled from the desk, rolling and crashing into each other, up until the body slumped over. Sam held the belt until the form stopped twitching. He let the body fall against the desk in a heap. where the dead man's face finally came into view. That wrench in my gut tightened, the one I'd had since first seeing the screen, roiling in my stomach, working its way into my chest, like I was going to throw up. Glassy eyes stared out from a face already bloated. A dark bruise straddled his neck, up to the edge of his jawline that sat off kilter, pressed at an angle away from the face that revealed the broken structure beneath. He stared lifelessly toward me, the TV on the ground gracious enough to keep the entire thing lit, to show its details with a sick clarity, to show that it was me. What I'd felt since the video first started. The shape of his head and shoulders, the way he held them, how he'd slumped in that very chair, the one now at my feet. I'd watched myself die right on the screen in front of me, killed by him. Sam knew it too, the way he turned back sedately, belt hanging loosely on his hand, the mechanical drag in his body took to move, and the rictus grin plastered over his face. Something unnerving lived behind it, a distance in his expression, like the plastic smile of a doll, set beneath eyes that knew nothing of what he was doing. An expression that didn't belong to a human being. He watched me back with it. Something like a shiver pulsed through him, given to quick, jutting convulsions of his chest, rapid and shallow, a mirthless, almost painful movement. It took me a moment in the silence to realize what it was. He was laughing. Everything cut to static. White noise choked out of the set in a rasping wheeze. I only stood blankly watching the flickering black and white specks, still seeing the outline of that last image burned into the glass. I rubbed my eyes like it could possibly wipe that picture away. I reached over and turned the TV off. It was a dream. I sat in the lamp's glow, contemplating, wishing my door had a lock. Adrenaline still lingered in my chest, a tangled mass snarled over my lungs. Just breathing felt labored, short. I was still drunk, maybe, or my drink had been spiked. I looked over at the cluster of bottles, not really believing the words in my head. It had to be a dream. The TV sat silent, its screen empty. It couldn't be real, none of it. The whole scene had the tinge of imagination. I could almost believe it had been a dream, despite the taste of iron on my tongue and the throbbing in my head. I looked at the door. A dream. Everything was fine. I listened to the night outside my window, full of crickets and traffic in the city, as it always was. I wish that damn door would lock. My clock flashed 12. Anxiety crawled over me each time the damn thing blinked. The air was always stagnant in that room, hot and suffocating. Even with the window open, not even a breeze dared to cross inside. I wasn't going to fall back asleep anytime soon, and I sure as hell wasn't about to see if there was anything on TV. I should just unplug the damn thing, I thought. Throw it away tomorrow. This place. Those two words rolled in my head, caught in my teeth as I chewed them over. Blink, blink, blink went the clock. Nothing. That's what was tying me there, to that apartment. The musty, dank, cramped hole I'd walled myself into. Nothing at all. Other than money, the constant mental drain of school, all the useless shit that I bought just to feel better, that I kept in that miserable little room that I didn't even like. I slammed my fist on the desk, scattering the papers onto the ground. I wasn't even on the lease. I could just walk out that door, never come back. There was nothing stopping me. Just walk out and forget about everything. Walk until I'd found myself somewhere new. Then what? Curl up and die, probably. But I'd be free of this place. I looked down at my hand, clenched into a fist on the desk. It was shaken, coaxed on by something that lived deeper than the anger boiling through my veins. Fear. As hard as it was to admit even to myself, I was scared. Too much of a coward to stand up for myself, to look Sam in the eye, to just get up and go. Out of the nest, and truly, deeply afraid for the first time. Ever since I'd stepped into that apartment. That first week, after finding out what kind of house this was, I bought it. Slept with it leaning against the bedpost by my head. A baseball bat. 3 feet of dense maple formed into a crude club. I'd felt so stupid even buying it. In what idiotic fantasy did I see myself springing out of bed and wielding it against some intruder? The truth was, I'd never even swung the damn thing. The reality of barreling this thing into another human being hung too heavy at the far end. The idea always seemed easier when you see it in movies and books. But there was a realness to feeling it, holding it out from my arms. It felt heavy in my hands even then. I knew I'd never have the guts to use it. The bat soon found its way underneath the bed, to be forgotten, out of sight, out of mind, buried alongside the embarrassment that filled me every time I'd see it. Looking over my shoulder, I could almost see the handle peeking out. I waited there, playing with my thoughts for an indeterminate series of moments, fretting, swaying in my seat, thinking, half standing, worrying, sitting back down, until there was no choice left. I finally forced myself to do it. I got up, as quietly as I could, and walked to the door, cracked it open just enough to peek out, to ease my mind. I looked down the hallway toward the trickle of light coming from the living room. With small, measured steps, I entered the vacuous dark of the hallway, my hand lingering on the safety of the door handle and the lit room at my back. I had to force myself to let it go and walk out. Sporadic, flashing bursts of light drifted from around the corner, splashing color against the wall, like a TV set flickering through a series of channels. The edge of the living room began to peek into focus. The exaggerated shadows of empty pizza boxes, beer cans, and a bong flickered and danced over the carpet. The table came into view, along with the back of the couch. Already the musty smell of body odor and weed swirled in the air, mixing with the stench of puke coming from the bathroom. Home sweet home. Over the scene, the television flipped through a rapid series of disjointed images, marred with the pulse of static lines. Scanning through the channels, the signal choked in and out as it came through. I shielded my eyes to see the back of the couch against the light of the TV. A foot slumped over the end. I leaned forward, the floor groaning beneath my weight. My heart skidded in my chest, and for a split second, I regretted not bringing the bat with. The foot didn't move, not even a twitch. Careful of where I placed my foot, I leaned further until Sam came into view, sleeping. Ed slept just on the other side, crumpled on the sofa chair. I almost snorted with relief, the sound coming out louder than I anticipated. Sam's eyes fluttered for a second, slowly coming to, open to look at me, a glassy look of confusion in them. We shared a look. He dropped his head back onto the couch, letting his eyes close again. Idiot! I let my breath out, realizing only then I'd been holding it. I could almost laugh. You stupid idiot. Half directed at him, half directed at me. Of course he was sleeping. Of course these two were harmless. They'd blasted themselves into such a stupor they couldn't even stand if they wanted. My palm stung. I looked down, forcing my hands to unclench. 4 little crescents were pushed deep into the skin. I let out another sigh, the feeling of relief fleeting. My chest had loosened a bit, but something still clung over it. I found myself staring at the front door, just on the other side of the couch. The only door out of this apartment, unless I wanted to risk 3 stories from the balcony. A deep longing welled in me. Home. I wanted nothing more than to just run, get the hell out of this tiny apartment and away from these strangers. Sam wasn't a bad guy, I told myself, looking down at his sleeping form. Probably has his own demons. Ed, too. I never really thought they would actually. I didn't know for sure, but the thought of it didn't feel real then, looking at him. That was something you'd only ever hear about, read in the paper. It wasn't something that actually happened in your life. I was homesick. It had been there from the moment I'd moved in. The cutting, intuitive wrongness that dwelled inside, waiting like an impending freakout that threatened to push its way through the skin. I didn't want to be here. I hadn't ever wanted to. Instead of taking that step toward the door, I pushed the discomfort down, forcing myself to think about other things, like the drink I desperately needed. I wandered my way into the kitchen, more a narrow hallway stuffed with cramped cabinets, a stove, a sink, and just barely enough room for a fridge. Then there was me, in the middle of it all. The clock on the stove greeted me, blinking as well. The whole apartment must have lost power. It couldn't have been for long. The beer I grabbed was cold. All I had to do was find a bottle opener. I fumbled around the cluttered silverware drawer, tossing over loose forks and spoons, digging for it. I stopped. It wasn't there. The large, heavy-bladed knife that sat on the left side of the drawer. I looked over to the sink, brimming with the pile of dishes. It could be there, somewhere at the bottom. It could be somewhere else. My stomach was sinking, a slow but precipitous drop. I found the bottle opener and popped the cap, attempting to talk myself down. Foam spilled from the top and over my fingers. Half-heartedly, I held it over the sink. Combating the tightening in my chest, I leaned over to the window, sliding it open. A rush of cool air washed over me. I let it envelop me, closing my eyes, just feeling the sense of fresh air in my lungs. The night hung impenetrable outside. A tenebrous, smothering curtain wrapped over our apartment. I normally found a comfort in feeling it next to me. Not that the view was ever anything to write home about. It opened out toward the apartment jammed in next to us. Only a wall and a neighbor's window. Somewhere around the bend, the light of a lone street lamp attested to the rest of the world's existence. That night, a different sense overwhelmed me, looking out. Like what I was seeing wasn't actually there, wasn't a tangible part of reality. I was a distant spectator in a different world. Lethargy clung to the air, flooded my lungs. Like there wasn't enough in the room. Like the apartment had grown smaller. the window drawn further from my reach. I stepped back, sinking. The walls around, the too-tight kitchen, the cabinets and stove and fridge, the too small ceiling, all spun, pulled the floor out underfoot. I tried to breathe, but my throat was closing, lungs struggling to hold on to any air. Choking. The thought slipped through. A groan drifted from the living room. Fuck. Sam! Not fucking now! I grabbed the counter, holding myself up. Spinning, lolling from side to side. I was going to pass out. Midnight blinked from the darkness. 12 a.m. 12 o'clock. Static rushed in from the living room, creeping over the kitchen floor with a pulse of nauseating light. The click of a glass followed it, knocked off the table, followed by a slurred attempt at a sentence cutting its way through sleep. I could hear him shifting on the couch. I heard him stop. What the His words fell back into the unintelligible groan. A shifting tone slid into his voice just before it dropped out. Something I had never heard before. I held on to the counter, legs turned into thin sticks that wobbled and bent beneath my weight. Fear. That's what it was. Fear in his voice. It sank deep into my spine. I pulled myself through the galley, trying to find purchase beneath my feet, enough to throw myself down the hall and into my room. Run, idiot, run! I only stared at the wall ahead of me, and Sam's shadow, standing, stretching to its full distorted height along it. I tried to say something, to yell, to force any words out, to plead with him. Tell him he's not that kind of person. You couldn't actually kill another human. All the air I had left in my chest, my swollen tongue sat like leather in my throat. Right? This was stupid. This wasn't real. None of it. It was a dream I had had earlier. Sam was a lot of things, but not a killer. Neither of them were. I found my legs, my backbone. I kept my head down and walked to my room. More of a skitter, past the flash of the television and the figure standing before it. Through the scream that filled my head as I refused to look up, to the tickle that chased at the back of my neck with each step, anticipation of the sudden jarring blow from behind that cracked my skull, break the bone into the soft flesh of my brain. But how much can you really get to know a stranger in a few short months? I turned the doorknob, slipping into the safety of the room that was not mine. I stood for a long moment, leaned against the door, until my left hand grew numb. I looked at the beer still clenched in my grip, beads of dew dripping from its surface and running over my fingers. A vision of the man standing in the hall, sluggishly lumbering through the dark, flashed as I closed my eyes. I lifted the beer to my parched mouth, wincing at its bitterness. I paced, drank, paced more, pulled the empty bottle to my lips, all while it sat there, observed me, the reflection of my room, my figure in it, pacing to and fro, only stopping occasionally to stare into its depths. Only the high-pitched hum of its capacitors responded. Just a collection of plastic, glass, and circuits, I told myself. That's all. The clock blinked. Midnight. Like only a second had passed. Everything I'd seen would sear against the TV surface, clinging like static. The man slumped against the desk, vacant eyes and that smile over a bloated purple face. I wandered to my window, looking outside at the night, the parking lot below, The road behind it. Not a soul was out. The steady roar of the highway. Dead quiet. Like the world had disappeared. That goddamn TV. I'd given up on pretending. I turned toward it, scanning over every inch of the black mirror, expectancy bubbling under my skin, like there was something on the other side of it. That it was giddy to flick back on and show me more. My arm twitched with the thought of smashing the bottle right through the screen. This was far past homesickness. I had to get the hell out, to prove the world was still out there, that there was something beyond those walls. This fucking apartment. I gave in, slid up to the TV, crawled along the side again, pressed the button. It was a dream. I was going to turn it on, prove that to myself. Then I was going to walk out of that building. I was going home. The button depressed, clicking as a whine squealed through the circuits, brightening the screen as it came to life. A rush of air pumped through me. A brief flicker sparked, punctuated by the rapid sweep of channels. One by one, it scanned through the numbers, each as empty as the last. My nerves grew more and more fraught, stretched with each staccato jump, like they were going to snap. I couldn't do it. I couldn't let myself look anymore. I didn't want to see what it decided to show me. It stopped, settled on an image, deep green and still. I only saw it for a second, just a flash of a few frames before I dropped the bottle, threw myself away from it. Crawling to the ground, I slid my arm under the bed, dug through the mess, until I felt wood grain against my fingers. Lifting it, I brought the end through the air, feeling its weight where I held it perched over the TV. I refused to look at the screen, the movement on it. Just put the bat through it. End it. My forearms tensed, violence pulsing through them, rooted into my legs. A force pulled at the bat to swing, beckoned it to smash everything. I could feel my hands tightening, gripping the handle, opening and closing, rhythmically. The bat shook in my grip. It was so heavy. I let it feebly slide down to my side, the flush of self-pity and shame a cocktail in my chest. Something did snap then, resolute and solidified in the core of my being. I left the image, playing whatever the hell it was going to play, and slid into the hall. No matter what happened, I was going to walk through that front door. I slowed, only a step into the hallway. That image, the brief second I had just seen on the TV, was playing out in front of me. This moment, this very scene mirrored on the television just seconds before. The hallway, the glow, uneven and nauseating, trickling in from the living room, flickering like tongues of flame before falling back into darkness, all with the familiarity of a recurring dream. I held the bat low but firm, already feeling blisters along my palms. Whatever it had to show me, I didn't care. I forced another step, the faint crackle of static growing louder, mixed with the hammering of my heart in my ears. I strained my eyes, pushing forward. Shadows danced across the static, like the movement of a body at the end of the hallway, perched in ambush right around the corner. The television grew brighter, blinding, watching. Sweat trickled over my brow, chest thudded as the static grew stronger, louder, pulsed in time with my breathing. The bat lifted those last few feet mechanically, the faint shuffle of footsteps. The door was right there, right around the corner. All I had to do was take the turn. A few more steps. Run. Adrenaline rushed through my legs, pushed from behind. Home. That feeling again as it came into view. Like I wasn't there. Turning the corner, my entire being pulled forward, sprinting. Right into the figure that stood in front of me. His full frame twisted at me, ripped away from the screen. A scream contorting across his face, a glint in his hand. I was a distant spectator in another world. The wood cracked with a sickening thump, a low, dull thud, like a melon smashed against concrete. It's not real. Concussion reverberated through my forearms, stinging the adrenaline-soaked fiber. A splattering of crimson slicked along the wood and across the wall as he crumpled from the impact. A dream. Silence followed. A great hush settled over the very air, perfectly still and preserved. Cold. My arms burnt, flecked with warm blood. Sam twitched in a broken mass at my feet. Red leaked from his mouth and ears, fell from his head, collected in a pool next to the remote, still in his hand, glinting in the television's light. In the distance, someone screamed, high-pitched and wailing, grief-filled. I looked over at Ed, curled in a hysterical ball, rocking, letting out that awful cry. He was making that sound looking at me, pulling away like a frightened animal, a rabbit shrieking in the jaws of a coyote. It faded as I looked to the screen, still playing. The last thing Sam had seen. On repeat, cutting back, looping a moment in the hazy light. The hallway, the light, the figure that stands at the end before stepping into our living room, coming to a stop over the man sleeping on the couch, the bats held by their side, before they lift it, then bring it down over and over until it's stained and dripping. That's when they turn to look at me, to laugh. My own face, standing over the butchered form of Sam. That smile on my lips. The bat slid from my fingers, clattering against the floor. I left it there. The body. The television, gleefully replaying the scene over and over. I left everything sitting as it was and stepped to the door. Unlocked it and walked outside. The warmth of blood and sweat fresh against my numbing body. My breath caught in the chill night air. Slipped away in small clouds of steam that disappeared into the empty sky. And I left the dream behind that closed door.
Chilling tales for dark nights.